Good evening and welcome. Find a comfortable position, let your jaw unclench, and let your breath grow slow and easy. As you settle in for the night, there is nothing you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. Whenever you're ready to drift off, I'll be your quiet company. Tonight, let's quietly explore for gentle corners of the past, small rooms, steady hands, and ordinary tasks that moved with the rhythm of daylight and rest. We'll begin inside an Edo lantern shop after dark, where paper shades, bamboo frames, and calm lamplight, and the day in tidy order. We'll float to the Chinampas of Tenochtitlan at dawn, watching gardeners guide water and soil into neat furrows. We'll step onto a New England pond in winter to follow crews who harvest ice with careful lines and patient saws. And we'll finish in a shaded yard in Polynesia, where bark becomes cloth under a soft, even beat. No scenes of alarm, no rushing, only the reassuring pace of work that knows itself. If your mind wanders, that's all right. Let the details pass like street lamps on a quiet road. Close your eyes whenever you wish, and let these stories keep watch while you rest. The street has softened to a hush, and shutters along the lane rest against their hooks. Inside the lantern shop, the last customers have gone, leaving a faint trace of oil and fresh paper. The door bar is set gently, never slammed. Sound carries easily through wooden walls. A small brazier glows at the back. Its warmth is modest, just enough to keep paste supple and fingers comfortable. In this room, the day narrows to familiar tasks that make tomorrow easier. On the bench lie the shop's simple tools, a paste bowl smoothed by thumbs, a narrow brush with trimmed hairs, a bone folder, and a bundle of slender bamboo ribs. 2 frames wait to be mended, one for a collapsible chicken, another for a square andon with wooden rails and sliding paper panels. The owner runs a thumb along the edge of a panel to feel for looseness. He does not tug, he listens with his hands. Work begins with a small cloth, dampened and wrung, to wipe a week of dust from the grain. Paper washer rests in a covered stack to the side. Sheets are thin, pale, and quietly strong. He lifts one with both hands, letting it find its own shape in the air before laying it flat. A fingertip trails the edge to check for straight fibers. This is not ceremony. It is a habit that saves time. A good sheet receives paste evenly, holds light softly, and does not wrinkle when night grows damp. The paste is rice-based, mild and forgiving. It prefers calm hands and a clean brush. The wicks are another small ritual. He unknots the jar's cloth cover and smells the oil. Tonight's his rapeseed, clear and steady. A row of short wicks sits in a wooden tray, their ends trimmed square. He pinches each between finger and thumb to test firmness. A wick taught to behave will not sputter and smoke the paper. Soot is avoided not by luck but by small predictability, short flame, steady oil, and a shade kept at the right distance from heat. A chicken on the counter needs new ribs. Bamboo splits with a soft whisper under a thin knife, then bends along memory rather than force. He coaxes each rib around a round form, ties it lightly with thread, and leaves it to settle. The sound in the shop is gentle, a brush lifting from paste, a thread sliding tight, the tiny click of a bone folder smoothing paper against wood. In a city built of timber, quiet has its own safety. Even routine sounds are kept low and even. In the corner, a pot of water warms for thinning paste and washing brushes. He carries the used brush there now, strokes it along a smooth stone under the surface, and lays it hair side up to dry. Tools are never put away while tired. A brush with a bent tip teaches ugly lines tomorrow. A knife left damp invites a rough edge. The shop's comfort comes from not asking morning to fix what evening could make right. He repairs an anden panel next. The wooden lattice has a small gap where a sliver of grain lifted. He smooths it with a touch of oil and rubs a fingertip over the spot until the raised edge lies back down. New paper is measured by eye to finger widths beyond the frame, then torn along a wetted line so the edge feathers and accepts paste without a reach. The sheet settles like breath across the lattice. He presses with the bone folder in long, unhurried strokes, always from center to edge, always the same quiet pressure. Coins are counted, last copper pieces gathered in a shallow tray, each with a faint bite on its rim from earlier trades. A brush tally marks the day in a thin ledger. Lantern mended, shade replaced, 2 bottles of oil, 3 new wicks, 1 repair promised by market day. The numbers are small and steady. The ledger closes with no flourish, only the knowledge that morning will find its first task already named. He lifts a finished chicken and tests it by breath. A slow exhale across the shade skin shows how the paper moves barely evenly. Light, when it comes, will spread gently through fibers aligned by patient hands. He places the lantern on a low shelf, collar facing outward, thread not tucked beneath. Little details become a kind of welcome for the next pair of hands that will reach here. A quiet note of custom fits here. Edo's evenings did not end with darkness. Many homes favored anden lamps with sliding paper, because their steady glow did not surprise the eyes. Shops like this kept neighborhoods on time, opening shutters, measuring oil, trimming wicks so households could stitch small tasks between dusk and sleep. There is common, knowing how light behaves. The bar across the door is lifted once more as the owner checks the street. He slides it back with care, sets the brazier's ash to a level bed, and folds a cloth over the paste bowl. The room explains itself without speech. The bundle of ribs, the stack of paper sleeping under weight, the ledger placed at the same angle as every night. He bows his head, not a ritual so much as a pause, and lets the stillness answer him. A single lantern is left burning in the window, its flame trimmed low. It is not for show. It keeps humidity kind to paper, discourages damp that could creep into glue lines, and tells a passing neighbor that this shop is kept in good order. Outside, the lane holds the hush of sandals gone, dogs dreaming, and the last car rattle far away. Inside, tools rest where hands expect them. The day has narrowed to a point, and then it lets go. Morning does not arrive all at once. The lane leans first, then the lattice window shows a calm gray, then the papered lamp by the door looks necessary. The owner enters with sleeves tied back and a cloth folded in his belt. He lifts the door bar with his usual care and sets it against the wall where it always rests. A sweep of the threshold brings yesterday's dust out toward the gutter. The broom's straw whispers. The street answers with the faintest clap of wooden clogs somewhere around the corner. Inside, the room returns to work by meeting small predictabilities. He uncovers the paste, stirs once, and thins it with a spoon of warm water until the surface holds a soft, slow wave. The brush that slept hair up is tested on scrap. The line spreads kindly and stops where it should. A fresh bundle of bamboo ribs, tied the previous night, is loosened and allowed to relax in the hand before it meets the round form again. He speaks to nothing, The tools invite silence. The first visitor is not a customer, but a supplier. A boy from the oil cellar carries two stoppered bottles wrapped in rice straw. The corks are still damp, proof that the jars were filled at dawn. The oil is pale and clean. A little is poured into a saucer and a wick is dipped, then lit, then trimmed with shears, until the flame stands no higher than the nail of a small finger. The smoke is nearly invisible. Good oil means less soot on paper, fewer evenings spent washing shades with a damp cloth bruised by ash. A tally mark lands in the ledger, a small coin crosses the counter, the boy leaves, sandals soft on the lane. Shutters along the opposite shop swing open. Somewhere a vendor shakes a bell for fish, somewhere else a water seller moves with a pole over his shoulder. The lantern maker hangs to sample pieces at the lintel, one square andon, one small chicken painted with a red crest. They are not bright, they glow at the level a passing eye can live with. A strip of paper with the shop seal sits in a dish. When a repair leaves, that seal will fold over the cord, neat and light, a quiet signature that tells whose hands last tended the frame. Customers come as mornings usually allow, one with a shade scratched by a cat's curious paw, one with a collapsible lantern whose ribs have learned to split, an innkeeper who needs 5 wicks, and a spare cord for the stair lamp. Each is greeted with the same courteous economy, an open palm for the parcel, a nod, a question that is less a query than a confirmation. This panel, that rib, the work is assessed by touch rather than show. The shop promises a time, not a performance. Repairs begin. The scratched panel is eased from its groove with a wedge of wood wrapped in paper so it will not scar the frame. The old sheet is peeled away with a dampened fingertip until the lattice shows its pattern. Clean water wipes the rails, new paper is measured and torn along a wetted line. The sheet settles with a sigh you can only hear if you are close enough to be trusted. Paste finds the edge in a long stroke. The bone folder follows. Air bubbles flee the center. The panel lies flat, the seam hidden in the grain. The split rib calls for a different patience. Bamboo is pared along the back, not across the break. The split is encouraged to close under a light binding of thread. A witness strip paper as thin as breath is pasted over the join and smoothed until it nearly vanishes. The lantern is opened and closed, opened and closed, so the repair learns the motion it must live with. A cheap fix works once, a good one agrees to repeat. A short cultural note fits here, offered like a footnote spoken quietly. Many households in Edo preferred lamps whose covers slid rather than lifted, because lifting brings a draft. Drafts tempt flame, flame teases paper. Accidents in wooden neighborhoods travel fast when allowed. Shops like this one built safety into routine choices: short wicks, steady oil, panels that move side to side, shades replaced before their fibers fatigue. Before the sun climbs high, the maker turns to packing for market. A low cart waits in the alley, its bed padded with a folded quilt whose patches know this job. Finished pieces are wrapped in soft paper and tied with thin cord that opens into pulls. Square frames lie between slats so corners cannot learn to bruise. Collapsible lanterns, folded like quiet umbrellas, rest in a long basket with bamboo dividers to keep their ribs from quarreling. Each bundle carries a brush mark, no words, only the shop crest so the stall can be set quickly with items faced the right way. He selects a handful of small accessories that markets like to swallow without thinking. spare wicks bundled in tins, cork stoppers for oil jars, little cord loops for wall pegs, and a few painted slips that can be applied to plain chicken when a customer wants a family crust. Before evening, the paint box is closed tight. The brushes for that work will not travel today. Lettering asks for a quiet table and a breath that does not bounce. A neighbor pokes a head through the door frame to ask if a lantern can be lent for a shrine visit tonight. The shop keeps 3 sturdy pieces for such errands. The loan is recorded with a brush dot beside a name. A note says return at dawn. Shared light serves more than commerce. It speaks to streets where doors watch out for one another. Rain begins as a polite guess rather than a fact. The smell of wet earth arrives a few breaths before drops stipple the lane. The maker lays oilcloth over the cart bed and shifts the packed frames under the awning. The sample lanterns at the lintel are lowered and snuffed, wicks pinched, smoke smoothed away with a slow wave of the hand. A wet day changes little but tempo. Buyers still come. They simply stand closer to the eaves while choosing. Between customers, small maintenance keeps the room true. The catcher on the door is tightened with a quarter turn so the shutter will not chatter in a gust. A hairline lift in a bench rail receives a touch of oil rubbed in with the side of the thumb. The knife sees 2 passes on a fine stone, then a wipe on folded paper to lift any stubborn metal dust. Small tools wear out in places that eyes can forget. Hands learn them first. Near midday, the cart goes out. The narrow wheels prefer the lane center, where puddles are shallowest. At the market, the stall is simple, a reed mat for the floor, a low bench to hold the andon in a row, a line to hang the stowed chicken so they read as a family. The glow is set low, daylight provides the rest. Shoppers lean in. Fingers travel the edge of a panel, lift a collapsed frame and let it bloom. Smile at the ease. The maker answers questions without decoration. Oil types, wick trimming, how to slide a panel with 2 fingers only and not the palm. These are the subjects that fill a market hour without tiring anyone. Back at the shop, an apprentice sweeps again and wipes the bench with a barely damp cloth so paste dust does not harden. He counts wicks, rebundles the 10 that lost their string, and lays a fresh sheet of paper under the place where panels rest. He practices a seam on scrap paste, lightly fold once, smooth from center, and sets his work aside to be checked rather than praised. The room teaches him with repetition instead of speeches. By afternoon, the lane steams gently where the rain lifted. The cart returns lighter, the basket of chicken 2/3 empty, the bundle of spare cords thinner. A list in the maker's head becomes a line in the ledger. Order more narrow ribs from the bamboo yard, grain straight, no spots. Another note, visit the paper seller for a pack of sheets half size, better for in panels. The ledger does not boss the day, it keeps tomorrow from stumbling. A few final visitors come before dusk. A midwife who wants a lamp that can travel between houses without surprising sleeping people. A tea house boy bringing a panel with a burn the size of a bean that he swears he did not make. Both are received with the same quiet and the same solution-minded hands. The midwife is shown a lantern with a guard ring around the shade so elbows cannot bump it. The tea house panel earns a gentle correction and a promise to have it back before the evening's first guests arrive. Light lengthens along the grain of the floor. The sample lanterns return to the lintel, their wicks newly trimmed. The door bar waits for night. Paper sheets breathe under weight. Tools rest. The room having been opened to errands and rain and market talk begins to narrow again toward the hour when the brazier's ember and the ledger's last line will be the only tasks left. Festival days arrive not with noise, but with errands that begin 2 weeks early. A messenger from the shrine leaves a folded list sealed with a brush circle. The maker opens it at the bench and smooths the paper with the side of his hand. The requests are familiar: large chicken for the main gate, medium pieces for the side approach, small hand lamps for the children's procession, and to Stouthanden for the offering room where draughts often whisper under the doors. He sets a quiet order in the room: frames to the left, sheets in the middle, pigments and ink to the right. A low rack receives finished work so fresh paint can dry with air moving along it, not across it. The apprentice brings in a box of stencils, thin sheets kept between boards, each cut with the family crest or the shrine emblem. They smell faintly of oil and old paper. The maker lifts one to the light and checks the edges with his thumbnail. If a cut looks fuzzy, he trims it with a small knife until the line is clean again. Paint is simple here. Black ink made from a stick and water for lines and characters. Vermilion for seals and borders. A warm yellow for small accents. Pigment is mixed with a drop of gentle size so it will sit on the paper without wandering. The brush hairs are trimmed square for crests and left long for curved work. Before any important stroke, the maker touches the brush to scrap and watches the line widen and stop. He waits for his breath to swell, then begins. The shrine crest comes first. The stencil is taped with light paste dots that will lift later without bruising the fiber. A soft brush lays color through the cut, not pushed, only pressed, and lifted and pressed again until the shape is even. The stencil is peeled from one edge like the lid of a lacquer box. The clean white around the crest stays white. A feather of straight color would be noticed at a gate. The maker prefers not to be noticed. He hangs the piece on the rack and moves to the next. Visitors bring orders of their own. A bathhouse asked for 5 lanterns with one bold character each to guide sleepy feet at night. A noodle shop wants a pair painted with a simple name and a thin wave motif at the bottom where steam will billow past. A neighborhood group needs 10 small collapsible pieces with matching tassels for children who will walk behind a drum. The work is varied but not complicated. The shop's calm rhythm is the secret ingredient. The apprentice practices characters on scrap. He fills a page with the same 2 strokes until they meet without arguing. The maker corrects by drawing once beside the attempt, then leaves in to find the shape with his wrist. A good character looks as if it arrived in one breath. The apprentice learns to sit with his weight low on the stool and to let the brush guide the fingers rather than the shoulder. Practice sheets dry on a cord and later wrap spare parts. Frames for the largest chicken are bound on the round form and tied to hold their measure. Paper is measured a little generous for these, as festival air can be humid. Joints get a whisper more paste so seams do not lift if a breeze wanders through the gate. Once covered, each large lantern rests flat for a while under a board so the curves set kindly. Then the crest is laid on, centered by the eye, not the ruler. The eye lives with the street. It knows where a design will look right when the lantern is at human height. As evening approaches, safety steps come forward like small, familiar prayers. Wicks are trimmed short as a habit. Shades are kept at a distance a thumb could remember. Sand sits in a shallow pan near the door. A damp cloth lies folded by the bench, changed twice a day so it will not carry old soot back to new paper. When a lantern must travel, it rides on a tray with low walls and a handle, not by its ribs. To carry, the tray sits a little higher than the waist so the flame meets clean air and sleeves stay well away. The maker shows the apprentice how to test a new lantern without trusting a gas. The wick is lit. The flame stands small. The lantern is lifted and set by the door, then closer to the wall, then near a corner, while the maker watches for smoke. If smoke appears, he adjusts one thing at a time, wick, oil, distance until the shade holds its clean tone. A record in the head grows from these checks, and later it will be written briefly in the ledger. Shrine pieces short wick, bathhouse guard ring recommended. A brief note belongs here, spoken softly. In wooden cities, caution lived in ordinary gestures. Street officers preferred corridors lit evenly rather than bright corners and dark pockets. Households learned to move shutters sideways and to keep paper tight to its frame. Lantern makers helped by offering fittings that discouraged careless sleaze and by teaching buyers to snuff with a pinch and a long breath rather than a hard blow. These habits are unromantic. They are also kind. Night deepens. The market crest pieces are dry enough to stack with thin papers between. The apprentice ties cords with flat nuts that remember how to open. Tassels for the children are cut from silk left from a past order, brushed once to settle their strands, and tied so they sit away from heat when hung. The maker writes small labels with a steady hand, no more than 2 characters to remind delivery. Gate side, inner. A messenger from the shrine returns to collect the first batch. He carries a pole with padded ends. The lanterns are hung from it, 6 to a side, spaced by short cords so they do not touch. The maker lifts each carefully, hands near the rim where the frame is strongest. The messenger counts softly and repeats the number. A thin wooden tablet is exchanged with a brush mark and a date. Payment will travel later with the abbot seal. Tonight needs balance more than coins. When the street becomes a band of softer dark, the shop's own lighting is lowered. The sample lanterns at the lintel stay, but the inner lamps drop to a murmur. Paint bowls are covered with damp cloths so their skins will not dry. Brushes are washed until water runs clear, then smoothed with the fingertips and laid hair up to sleep. Stencils return to their boards and are weighted lightly to keep their edges honest. The apprentice sweeps with short strokes so dust rises as little as possible. He dampens the broom's tips and returns the pan of sand to its place by the door. He checks the small wooden bucket near the brazier and sets a lid over it. He has learned to place the lid upside down. The handle will not trap heat that way. He does not name this wisdom. He repeats it. Before the door bar comes down, one last test. The maker opens a newly finished chicken, lifts it, and breathes across the paper from 3 paces away. The shade accepts the breath without creasing. He trims the wick a fraction and watches the flame steady. The lantern earns its place at the rack. The room looks like a diagram of its own craft. Racks, frames, papers, tools all standing where they can wait cleanly tomorrow. He steps outside for a moment. The lane carries footfalls going home from the bath, a seller's last call dwindling toward the canal, and a sense that wood and paper have agreed to rest. He returns, lowers the bar and leaves the window lamp burning low, as he did last night and the night before. Small light keeps peace with small risks. Inside, the ledger receives a few sparse notes, crusts delivered, tassels ready to panels promised by noon, or good, stencils trimmed. The brush dries on a scrap of practiced characters. The room takes a long breath, and quiet returns to its corners. The season tilts without asking permission. Morning opens with a rinsed smell that lingers in the lanes. Wood shows a darker grain. The shop's paper window gathers a film that clears only after the shutters slide. Humidity softens everything that wishes to be crisp. The maker answers by changing little gestures, opening earlier, thinning paste a fraction less, and setting a charcoal pouch near the paper stack so Dap will choose that hum instead of the sheets. He lifts the bar, and the door moves with a polite stick where yesterday it swung free. A soft wipe along the jamb with oil coaxed from a cloth helps the wood remember its old manners. Inside, the paste bowl is stirred slowly, not to wake bubbles. In this weather, bubbles dry to small blisters that the eye forgives by day, but the flame reveals at night. The brush is combed with fingers, hairs laid flat so they will not separate, and draw watery lines where firmness is wanted. Cicadas begin early, their even rasp making the morning sound like a loon. In the shop, flame is kept modest, bright light and close air calls moths, and moths carry soft dust on their wings that clings to paste. A slender stick of herbal smoke a blend the apothecary sells for summer room smolders in a shallow dish near the open doorway. The scent is not strong. It teaches insects to drift elsewhere rather than drop their small loves onto white paper. Repairs are different under a wet sky. Panels lift a little at the edge even when well made. The maker uses a paste with a touch more starch so seams keep their promise. He works in longer strokes and presses slower with the bone folder, letting moisture squeeze evenly outward instead of gathering in a corner. Drying happens upright today, panels hung from a cord and spaced with to finger widths between so air can travel without hurry. A fan, moved by hand every few breaths, nudges the room in the right direction. The apprentice learns a quiet rhythm, 3 sways for the left line, 3 for the right, then stillness. Fans rush, crafts fan. Short wicks are even shorter when the air is heavy. Oil is tested more often. Rapeseed behaves kindly, but in this brightness it can ask for a finer trim or a little more distance between flame and shade. The maker lights a chicken, places it near the door, and watches for smoke. A tight, steady glow is the aim. He turns the wick a finger's width, breathes once, and the shadow on the paper eases from gray to milk. Adjustments, this small, accumulate into safe nights. The paper seller arrives with the day's middle. His pack rests against his back like a polite turtle shell, wrapped in indigo cloth and tied with a square knot that opens into pulls. He bows in the doorway, wipes his hands, and steps onto the threshold only when invited. Summer dust lives on sandals. The shop prefers to host less of it. He empties the bundle and opens it like a book. Inside lie samples pressed flat between thin boards, kozo sheets with long fibers, and a clean bite to the edge, neat sumata that lies softly under the palm, and gampi that holds a faint gloss as if light had already visited and stayed. He lifts each to the window, and the maker looks through it to judge how flame will travel. Kozo is best for the frames that must be opened and closed. Gampi suits the andon screens that live in one place and want a quiet sheen. The seller taps a corner with the nail of his little finger, a habit to hear crispness, and smiles when the sound is a modest note rather than a crack. Prices are spoken briefly. The ledger knows the shop's usual quantities and adds a little for festival months. Paper travels badly in rain. The seller suggests waiting an hour for a clearer sky. The maker agrees. Nothing here urges. They share water from a lidded cup so eyes can watch the rim and not the contents, then turn to storage. New sheets go underweight with a dry board, and a charcoal pouch offcuts move to a shallow tray that will wrap coins and ties for the market. Seconds become practice for the apprentice's brush. Summer adds visitors of a different sort. A moth finds the window lamp and inches along the paper, its soft dust leaving a faint trail with no malice. The apprentice lowers the flame until the glow sits inside the shade like a pearl, then opens the door a little wider. The moth feels night beyond and chooses it. The boy lifts the damp cloth near the bench and wipes the pane with a single slow stroke. Insects are not scolded. Paper is simply invited back to clean. A customer brings a chicken with a sag across its belly. In wet air, frames sometimes forget their courage. The maker opens the ribs, warms them with his palms, and binds a silk thread loosely around the middle so the curve will learn its old roundness again. He leaves it standing on a ring so the base does not flatten, and sets a small weight atop the crown where the frame is strong. Sags prefer patience to strength. Another visitor, a storyteller who performs in alleys on summer evenings, asked for a lantern with a rim wide enough for his hand shadows to read as crisp in the crowd. The maker sketches on scrap, then shows him a frame with a slightly broader band under the shade to cut glare from the bottom. He explains gently, lower light, broader rim, the shadows will look sharp, and the faces won't squint. The storyteller nods and pays into coins and a promise to call the shop's name during his next tale. The ledger adds a dot. The apprentice smiles without lifting his head from the brush. Humid nights teach other steps. The room accepts reed blinds hung in the doorway, strips spaced so air moves while moths hesitate. The lintel samples are lit only until dusk. After dusk, a single lamp inside keeps the shop's own humidity even without inviting a crowd of small wings. The brazier sleeps, paste dries on air alone. The apprentice sweeps twice. Not one summer turns grit into mud that prints underfoot if left. A pan of clean sand near the door holds a small spoon. A spilled drop of oil is dressed with sand at once and lifted away before it learns to stain. A soft note on material sense belongs here. In towns of wood and paper, the season is part of the toolkit. Spring taught brushes to wake from dry sleep. Summer teaches glue to be firm without stubbornness, and paper to be stored flatter, under more patience. Autumn will change the lesson's angle, and winter will ask for seams that forgive cold. The shop carries all 4 lessons at once. The hand simply selects the one the air requests. Evening returns with sound before color. Frogs in the drainage ditch, a hand drum somewhere toward the shrine, sandals and hurried along wet boards. The paper bundle from midday arrives under the eaves, carried by the seller's nephew now that the rain has thinned to a memory. The maker counts sheets by touch, not number, stack height, and finger weight, and sets them under the board and charcoal pouch. He writes one line, Kozo, Can't be good, store high. The night lamp is trimmed lower than usual. Summer needs less help to see. The apprentice ties insects, goes onto a frame for the window and smooths it with a bone folder, just as he would a panel. No wrinkles, no hard pulls. He learns to treat cheap cloth with the same hand he gives to expensive paper. Both have jobs that matter to the room's temper. Before the bar drops, the maker checks tomorrow's tasks on the ledger's margin. Two sagging frames to be rebounded, one storyteller's rim to sand and paint, shrine tassels to replace where humidity taught a twist, and a visit to the bamboo yard if the lane dries. He blows the ink to set the strokes, closes the book, and lays the brush across its rests. The hares will remember their line for morning. Outside, fireflies wake over the canal, little lamps that ask for no wicks and leave no soot. Inside, paper glows once, then rests. The room accepts the season's weight and returns it as order. Autumn arrives as a change in the air before a change in color. A cool thread slips along the lane at daybreak and lifts the edge of the shop's paper window. Wood answers with a lighter tone under the palm. Paste asks for a sip more water. The door bar lifts without tack. Even the broom sounds different against the threshold, less whisper, more straw and dry grain. The maker opens early to greet this shift. He thins yesterday's pace with 2 spoonfuls, stirs slowly until the surface holds a shallow wave, and taps the side of the bowl to quiet bubbles. The brush, combed with fingertips, lays a clean line on scrap. Paper sheets breathe easier in this weather. He empties a small bundle of kozo and fans it once so the edges will not cling. The fibers shine faintly under the morning gray. The apprentice has his own season. Today, he will complete a repair from start to finish while the master stands close and says little. The panel is modest and inside for a neighbor's room. He eases it from its groove with the paper-wrapped wedge, wipes the rails with a damp cloth, and lifts a fresh sheet with 2 hands, letting it find its shape before the paste meets it. The bone folder borrowed, not yet his travels from center to edge in patient strokes. No wrinkles, no rush. When the panel is hung to dry, it lies flat and calm. The master nods once, the apprentice bows a little too deeply, and the room pretends not to notice. A small gift waits on the bench at noon, a bone folder smoothed by years of palms, its edge trued on silk and oil. The master sets it down without speech. Only a brush dot on its side to mark the shop. The apprentice lifts it, balances it in his hand, and returns to work with shoulders that have learned a new weight. The day lies under clear sky. Lanterns for the shrine return for cleaning after summer use. Soot leaves in gentle circles under a damp cloth. Tassels, twisted by wet months, are combed with the teeth of a horn pick and retied so they sit neat under the shade room. The midwife stops to bring back the steady travel lamp she borrowed last moon. She leaves a packet of sweet rice and a thank you bow that needs no words. A teacher buys a small lantern with a low shade for her desk so brush strokes will sit where she intends. The ledger adds careful strokes. Returned, cleaned, retied, sold. Inventory begins when light angles across the bench. Bamboo ribs are counted by touch, not by number. Bundles weighed in the palm, knots checked for looseness. Each bundle's tie is replaced if it shows a start of fray. Frames restacked by size, largest at the back where their circles sleep without stress. Kozo and Gampi are lifted one group at a time onto the scale board, a clean plank that tells weight by balance and habit rather than numbers. New sheets slide under the older stack so use will move forward and storage will not grow a forgotten layer at the bottom. A charcoal pouch that kept damp at bay in summer is replaced with one that simply keeps scent. Too much dryness will make seams sulk. Stencils receive their hour. Edges are held to the window to fine feathering. A knife trims fuzz to a crisp line. Each sheet returns to its board with thin interleads that keep oil from kissing neighbors. The vermilion gish is washed and wiped so the rim will not crust. Ink stick and stone are cleaned until the rinsing water runs clear. Brushes dry hair up, then lie in their rack with tips parallel. A soft cloth rubbed with a breath of oil visits knife blades and the bone folder's working edge. Autumn is kind to tools that meet it ready. The apprentice practices characters once more, though his hands want new puzzles. Today he writes the moon-viewing name slip, a single brush for the harvest night. He fills a page the master traces once beside the best, a touch lighter, a curl calmer, then leaves the boy to find that quiet line again. The shop receives an order for chicken with a small rabbit silhouette for the festival. The figure is cut from thin paper and pasted inside the shade so the shape appears when lit and vanishes in daytime. The apprentice smiles, but does not say why. The master smiles back for the same reason. A note on custom fits here. When nights turn clearer, households favor softer light and steadier wicks. Summer's short flame becomes a fraction longer. Oil sits a little deeper in the cup so it can feed without hurry. Windows open to air rather than to cool. Paper breathes, and so do rooms. Lantern shops answer by offering shades that temper glare and fittings that remember small wings. Late afternoon brings housekeeping that prefers dry hands. The racks gain a pair of straps at their top, simple ties to stop a tumble if an autumn tremor walks through the neighborhood. The sand pan near the door is raked and refreshed. A new lid sits on the water bucket. Autumn sheds dust that would like a place to live. Offcuts are sorted, long strips to wrap cords and ties, squares to patch practice sheets, soft scraps to white knife edges clean. Nothing leaves without a job to do on the way out. A vendor from the bamboo yard stops with straight, even stock. The maker rolls each rod on the bench to look for a quiver that would reveal a hidden curve. He listens for a tiny tick where a knot lived and decides whether that place wants to be a rib for a small lantern rather than a large one. The apprentice learns to trust the ear as much as the eye. Toward dusk, the shop sets its own light for the season. Sample pieces at the lintel burn a little brighter than in summer, but not enough to pull insects from the canal. The inner lamp rests at a calm middle. The apprentice trims a wick by sight now, not with a guide. He knows the height the paper likes. He snuffs with a pinch and a slow exhale. A new habit feels old within a week when repeated with care. Customers arrive with small, pleasant problems. One asks for a cord to steady a porch lamp against evening breezes. Another wants a shade that throws light downward onto a board game without shining in eyes. The maker shows a thin ring he can add under the shade, a modest brim that sends glow where it is useful. He writes to notes, not long, just enough for morning hands to remember. By full dark, the count is complete. The ledger lists ribs by bundle, frames by size, paper by stack, oil by jar. Stencils touched, brushes trimmed, blades oiled, cords re-rolled, tassels combed. The figures are small and comfort the mind the way folded cloth comforts a shelf. The apprentice adds one line in his neat hand, bone folder received used once, to be kept smooth. He sets the folder on the rack where tools sleep, aligning its end with the handle of the knife as the master always does. The room folds itself closed as it did in spring and summer, but with edges that feel crisper. The paste bowl is covered, the brazier is banked to a memory. A cedar drawer takes the paper scraps scented with chrysanthemum petals. Insects prefer other places when that smell is near. The window lamp drops to a low pearl of light that carries the room through midnight. The bar lowers with a sound the lane knows well. Outside, a first leaf slides along the gutter. The canal speaks more plainly under clear sky. Someone far away claps a board to call a cat. Inside, paper and wood and string wait in clean lines for another day. The apprentice stands at the threshold a breath longer, and then steps back in to place the broom where it lives. He will do the opening sweep at dawn. The master nods without words. The shop has closed a small circle and drawn the next one, and now, leaving lamplight for waterlight, let's float into a cool blue dawn where willows mark the edges of long, narrow fields ahead, shallow boats slide between garden ridges, and hands guide water as gently as breath. When you're ready, we'll step onto the Chinampas of Tenochtitlan. Before the city wakes, the lake holds its breath. A thin mist sits low over the channels, and the small sounds of wood on water carry farther than they will at noon. A narrow boat noses from a shadowed bank, its bow lined with reed that remembers many dawns. One person stands at the stern with a long pole. He leans, plants the tip in the bed of the canal, and the craft glides forward as if pulled on a secret string. The garden ahead looks like a quiet puzzle. Long beds run in straight lines, each edged by reeds and held in place by willow stakes. The willows, tall, soft-barked trees planted years ago, drink the lake and offer roots that grip the banks. Their reflection trembles when the pole leaves the mud. Birds pick at the edges where insects learn to live during the night. Water rests between the beds in slow strips of silver. The boat slides against a low bank. The gardener steps onto woven matting set at the margin so feet will not break the edge. His tools are simple and light, a flat-bladed paddle for lifting soft mud, a fork for weeds, a basket plaited from lake reeds, and a planting stick with a rounded tip. He moves without hurry. This place remembers the pace of hands. First task is the same most mornings. Wake the soil with water already waiting at its sides. He opens a little gate cut in the bank with two careful pulls, letting a hand's width of water enter a side channel. It moves under the surface mats like a whisper. The bed drinks along its edges. He watches the line of dampness rise by finger widths. A bed that drinks greedily early will be patient at noon. A bed that sulks at dawn needs a kindness a trickle more water, or a skin of lake mud to carry moisture upward. He kneels and takes hold of a willow stake near the corner. It has loosened a little with last week's wind. He twists it with both hands, lifting it a thumb's length and pressing it down again, seating it deeper where the bank is strongest. Willows anchor these islands the way stitches anchor a hem. A settled stake means the long bed will keep its shape, and the reed edge will not crumble into the channel with the first hard rain. Mud is next. He dips the flat paddle just off the bank and teases up a scoop of soft bottom. It is black and sweet with rot, heavy when lifted, light again when spread. He lays it gently along the top of the bed in a thin ribbon no wider than his palm. 2 ribbons run the length from end to end. As he works, The mud relaxes into the finer soil beneath and freshens it without weight. This is how these fields were built layer by layer, season by season, vegetation and mud stitched with reed pressed by feet that knew where to step. Seedlings wait under simple shelter. A shallow frame of reeds holds a mat of soil cut from last season's beds. On this mat, small green starts raise their heads in even rows, maize with broad hearts, beans with careful pairs, amaranth showing a cloud of tiny leaves. He lifts the reed cover, taps the underside so dew does not fall and bruise the tips, and lets the morning air steady the plants. The shelter goes back at an angle to shade them until the sun climbs a little. Planting is measured by the hand. He lays the stick on the bed, presses, turns, and lifts a neat hole. 3 maize seeds enter, then a bean, then a squash at the corner. The practice is simple. Each helps the others. Stems give each other shade. Leaves protect soil. Roots share what they do not take. He presses the hole closed with the side of his palm so the rim seals, and the next breeze will not lift the seed from shallow sleep. Weeds are not enemies here so much as neighbors who must learn to stay at the fence. He pulls them with a gentle fork, shaking soil back to the bed. The bigger handfuls go to the basket. They will return as mulch once they wither. Tiny ones rest on the bank to dry, too small to trouble the water. He never strips a place bare. A skin of green keeps the sun from pulling too much from the bed. The boat brings small tools from bed to bed. He shoulders a bundle of reed strips cut last month. Where the edge has slumped, he sets a new length, ties it to the willow stake with 2 turns and a flat knot, and presses the seam with his thumb so it will not catch the pole when he passes again. Not sit on the water side, where they will swell and hold, inside the bed. Only smooth reed faces the soil. He pauses to listen. The city lies beyond low islands of green and gray, hidden now but close. Somewhere a wooden rattle marks the first patrol of the night watch going home. Somewhere else a cook cracks kindling. A duck rises from a nearby channel with a flap that startles the mist. The gardener breathes, counts under his breath to the rhythm of the birds, then steps back to his work. In places like this, time is kept more by sound and water than by a mark on a wall. A note belongs here, offered softly. These gardens are not floating in the way a raft floats. They are tethered to the lake's shallow floor, built up until they stand just above the water, then held in place by willow roots and woven edges. They seem to move when wind speaks in their reeds, yet they are steady enough to carry houses and altars and whole seasons of food. He tends the seedlings again. From the basket he takes a handful of dry lake grass and breaks it into small pieces, laying them at the feet of the new plants. This blanket does many little kindnesses. It keeps the top soil moist, it tells weeds there is less room than they hoped, and it mutes the patter of sudden rain so droplets do not hammer the bed into crust. He lifts one corner to be sure bugs have not decided to gather. A tiny beetle scurries away. He leaves at the far edge a little distance from tender stems. 2 neighbors pass in a longer boat, their poles rising and falling together like scissors opening and closing. They greet with their chins, saving breath. One calls a simple question about the water level at the inlet. The gardener answers with a hand. Shape. No one shouts. Sound carries to well over the channel. And good news travels on small signals. By mid-morning, the mist has climbed and gone, and the light lies flatter on the lake. The beds show their day faces, damp along the edge, darker in the middle, bright where fresh mud will dry to a skin by afternoon. The gardener kneels on a reed mat to give one bed a thin line of water in its center. He opens a small cut at the bank, lays 2 fingers there to feel the flow, and closes it again when the moist mark meets his rule, a willow twig laid crosswise at the right place. Lunch is modest and quiet. He sits on the boat's low seat with a cloth on his knees. Inside the cloth, a bundle of tortillas wrapped while still warm, a small jar of beans, a wedge of fresh cheese, and a pinch of salt in folded paper. He eats with a view of water that works and rests at the same time. The pole lies across the bow where it cannot slide. The basket sits between his ankles. He chews, looks once at the line of willows, and lets his eyes soften. When the boat moves again, the day has taken its shape. Beds in the sun get reed shades laid low for seedlings. Beds in the lee receive a little more mud along their crowns. A new willow cutting is set at a corner where a gap showed. He pushes it down through the bed until it feels the lake bottom, and then pulls it up a hand's width so the tip can breathe. It will throw roots down by evening. By next month, it will learn wind. He closes the small gate he opened at dawn. Water withdraws obediently, leaving the bed damp but not heavy, the edges firm under his feet. He polishes the top with the flat of his palm where his tools left a scar, making a skin that will shed the first sharp sun and keep its kindness for the hour when shade returns. Afternoon will bring harvest, neighbors, and a path toward the market. For now the gardens lie as they prefer to lie after morning, edges trued, seedlings settled. Water behaving like a polite guest. The pole lifts, the boat slides, the willows mark the lane. The city waits a little while longer for its greens. By mid-morning the light lies broader on the water, and the air has the clean, green smell that plants share when touched. The gardener lays his pole across the bow and opens a flat basket. Harvest today is not large, only steady. Handfuls of young amaranth heads, small squash with their blossoms still folded, tender maize shoots for soup, and herbs that speak quietly rather than shout episode, Hoja Santa, and a sprig or two of mint for someone's drink. He keeps a reed mat under his knees so the bed's crown will not bruise, and he moves along the row as if smoothing a blanket rather than taking from it. Cutting tools are simple. A thin obsidian flake set in a wooden handle gives a clean bite. A shell edge rides behind it for stems that prefer to part without a snap. He touches each plant before he cuts, feeling for firmness. Leaves that hesitate are left to tomorrow, when sun might loosen their grip. Blossoms are pinched with thumb and forefinger and laid in pairs so they will not crush their own softness. Bundles begin to organize themselves. He ties a narrow strip of reed around each group, to turns and a flat knot that lies slender under a hand. Small marks 1 notch, 2 notches clip the edge of the tie with a thumbnail, a quiet counting that the eye does not need to attend. 10 little bundles fill the first basket corner. He turns a leaf outward on the 11th. That leaf will speak new tens to the stall without a word. Herbs go to a shallow tray lined with damp leaves. The tray sits in the shade of the boat's low rail so the lake's cool will wander near them. Amaranth heads are stacked like thatch, tips alternating, so air can pass and everything stays friendly. Squash blossoms rest in a lidded gourd washed bright inside, and, before closing, he whispers a breath into it, not magic, just a check that the air within does not feel stale. It does not. The lid turns a quarter and holds. At the bed's end, he dips a bowl to wet a cloth. This cloth rides lightly over the more delicate greens. Not to wash soil away, there is very little, only to ease the morning's dryness from their edges. The cloth returns to the bowl sits in the boat, and the boat leans a shade to the left with the new weight. He shifts a basket to the right to keep the floor kind under his feet. Balance is constant, small, and untroubled. Neighbors begin to show their day's work. A woman pulls past with a low stack of humble, important things: firewood cut to stove length, reeds for mats, and bundles of watercress that still listen to their stream. A man with gray in his hair checks willow stakes by tapping each with his pole. The sound tells him which ones are chewing at their holes and need turning. Boats pass on the right by habit. When a bend narrows, one raises a hand so the other will hold back a heartbeat. There is no rule book posted on the bank. The water teaches its own rights of way. Channels lead toward a broader run, and there the traffic grows gentle and interesting. A child rides on a pile of gourds, keeping count of dragonflies. Two cousins argue softly about whether the squash should be propped higher. They change nothing and smile anyway. A vendor glides by with flowers as if the lake wanted to carry the marigolds stacked like small suns, lilies like white bowls. The gardener nods to all and answers questions with a tilt of the chin. Voices are kept soft. Distant sound travels here like a guest. It is not sent away, but it is not awakened needlessly. Harvesting brings small arithmetic that feels more like rhythm than sums. 10 bundles make one lift for the stall. 4 lifts make a layer in the larger basket. 3 layers fill it kindly without stress. A leaf turned outward becomes a marker for a buyer who trusts hands more than slips. Squash blossoms are counted by pairs, and then by 5s of pairs, because that number pleases mouths that cook for households. No one recites figures aloud. The fingers and the reed ties do the remembering. A side note, placed gently: markets in this city, great open squares called Tian, quickly trusted both barter and tiny measures of value. Cacao beans sometimes rattled in a gourd as small change, and lengths of woven cloth counted as fair payment. Yet for everyday vegetables like these, a regular stall and honest bundles worked, as well as coins. The face behind the greens held more weight than the bean in a palm. Before the boat turns toward the wider canal, he tends the beds once more as if tucking in a child. Wet reeds laid earlier are shifted a finger's width to keep new seedlings out of midday sun. A gap at the bank is pressed closed with the flat of his hand. A willow cutting just planted is given a twist so its fibers will remember to reach down. A tiny gate is closed 2 drops at a time until the surface lies level and a dragonfly's legs can pretend it is land. Now the pole answers the lake with long pushes. At the channel mouth, a low framework waits to upright posts with crossbars where boats pause to show their business. It is not a toll, only a polite checkpoint to keep heavy loads and haste away from fragile passages. A watcher sits with a gourd of water and a small board for notes. He raises his eyebrows. The gardener points with 2 fingers. Greens and blossoms. The watcher nods. A mark goes on the board, a protection for the bed keepers nearer the city who must not be surprised by pushes and wakes. The gardener thanks with a gesture that looks like a flicked drop of water and moves on. The canal widens and straightens. On both sides, long rows of Chinampas slide by, their willow lines making a double colonnade. The water reflects so much green that it seems to become leaf-colored itself. Where a reed edge shows where a teenager kneels to tie in a new bundle. Where a bed sags in the middle, someone spreads a ribbon of lake mud exactly as he did earlier, thin, even, convinced that patience wins. The gardener's boat fits into a gentle processional tending the same direction, not from command, only from common habit. Midday will sort them into many markets, for now the boats share the road. He checks the boat's straps. Bundles lie crosswise under two cords that do not cut, not sit where his hand can find them if he must loosen quickly. The heavier basket is set forward so the bowrides come even when a passing boat lends a little wave. The lidded gourd sits in a shallow ring that keeps it from wandering. A small wood wedge keeps the pole from rolling underfoot. Tools that rest correctly do not ask for attention when the mind is elsewhere. A breeze arrives down the canal, uncoiling the scent of wet earth and crushed mint. The gardener lets it carry a strip of shade from his hat across one wrist and keeps the stroke of the pole unhurried. He passes a house built on a larger island, white walls, a reed porch where corn dries and strings. A woman looks up from grinding maize on a low stone and returns to her rhythm. Her shadow moves in a way that suggests lunchtime will be soon. The market quay shows itself not with noise, but with neatness. Poles are piled at one end in an orderly herd. Benches are wiped with damp cloths that smell faintly of lime. Reed mats mark places and promises this stall for roots, that one for fish, one for flowers. The gardener glides to the bit of key he always uses, where a low stake wears the shine of his tie. He loops his cord, feels the tug, and the boat settles into its place as if the water was a bed made for it. He arranges the stall with the same calm he used in the field. Leaf outward for new tins. Blossom pears cupped in the middle of the table where passing elbows will not flick them. Herbs at the front for noses, and then to the back where they wait in shade. Prices, such as they are, live in the bundle, this much for that, and a little more for a smile, a little less for a neighbor who remembers last week's willow steak. A small gourd with a few cacao beans sits under the bench in case exact change is a kindness today. Other boats coast in, and the quay begins to hum, not loud, only full. The fishmonger's basket smells like morning river, the flower seller's arms carry color. A potter sets down bowls still cool from their firing. The gardener greets those he always greets, and nods to those he doesn't know yet. The day has turned a corner from tending to sharing. Before he sells the first bundle, he looks once back down the canal. The willows naked their thin hands in the distance. The beds lie flatter in the noonlight. Somewhere a pole lifts and plants again where he stood at dawn. The garden keeps moving quietly, even while he stands still a while and counts by leaves instead of by water. The market fills the way a pot fills with warm water, slowly, evenly, without surprise. Shade mats stretch between poles and settle into small, cooled squares. Baskets find their places on reed mats that have learned their owner's feet. The air carries mixed comfort, wet leaf, river fish, lime from scrub benches, and a little smoke from cooking fires at the edge where traders warm midday bowls of atoll. The gardener lays his goods with the same tidy mind he used on the beds. Birds forward, greens in the center, blossoms cupped safely, heavier bundles toward the back for weight. He keeps one reed mat clean to act as a work surface, where ties can be freshened and leaves can be patted smooth. A gourd of water sits beneath, a cloth tucked into its mouth so it rises cool for quick hands. Trade begins with greetings that are part of the price. The flower seller sets down a low tray and touches the corner of his stall to the corner of the gardener's. Good water, he says, which means both the canal and the wash on the herbs. Good light, the gardener replies, which means both the morning and the petals that look as if they were sown. A fishmonger pauses, leaving a thin scent that is more river than fish. He lifts two fingers to ask if there will be squash blossoms today. The gardener nods and opens the gourd just enough for the man to see the soft golden side. Payment in this place never needs to shout. A woman in a blue-dyed cloak offers a small cloth folded to a hand-span, a measure as real as a coin. For it, she asks for amaranth heads enough to fill her cooking bowl and a packet of mint wrapped in a wet leaf. The gardener weighs the cloth in his palm, then presses the herbs into the fold with a sprig turned outward as a courtesy. Elsewhere, cacao beans click in a small dish and change hands a few at a time. No one counts aloud, fingers keep track like beads in the dark. Orders arrive in short phrases. 10 for the stew, 2 lifts for the altar, blossoms for tonight, hands do the rest. The gardener ties, trims, and slides bundles forward in a rhythm that asks no thinking once it has begun. To turns of the thin reed, a flat knot that lies low, tails cut clean so they will not tickle a neighbor's basket. When a buyer adds one more to the pile with a hopeful look, the gardener smiles and pushes an extra sprig across without fanfare. Courtesy costs less than argument and fills the space where haggling would have lived. A small aside belongs here. Great markets in this world were attentive to order. Officials walked soft-footed with painted staves, not to seize or shout, but to remind through presence that weights should be honest and spaces kept clear. Disputes were rare and brief, witnesses were plentiful and willing. The gardener keeps his stall within a finger's breadth of the reed-mat line because the habit comforts everyone. Midday heat gathers on the plaza stones and then climbs away under awnings. The gardener shares a cup of atoll with the potter across the lane, a thick drink that steadies hands. The potter speaks of a glaze that worked better in last week's fire, then sets a small bowl by the herbs to hold stray sprigs that buyers flick away. It looks tidy, he says, and the gardener keeps it there. A tidy stall is a kind stall. Buyers stand more easily when the eye rests. Children arrive with errands folded into their fists. One holds 5 cacao beans and asks for the mint that smells like rain. The gardener rubs a leaf between his fingers and lets the child breathe it. The child nods sullenly and holds out the dish with both hands. Another comes with nothing but a word from her grandmother. Leaf for stomach, she says. He adds a pinch of epizote to her tiny basket and gestures for her to tell the grandmother to brew it softly. He will collect his price later in news. News is a second currency. The salt carrier says the southern causeway is drier than last week. The reed cutter will be at the bend near the herons tomorrow. Good lengths already sorted. A midwife mentions that a certain willow line is bending to fast and wants more steaks. The gardener notes these with a calm face that means both thanks and memory. He trades a handful of mint for a rumor of carp schooling near a low spill, not because he will fish, but because the fishmonger will care to know. The day's peak passes like the top of a bell curve, felt and then gone. Buyers thin, traders trade with traders, and every stall turns an eye toward the homeward part of its work. The gardener counts what remains. He folds a handful of herbs back into a damp cloth to bring to a neighbor who is ill. He sells the last blossom pears to a cook who arrives late, then ties to small bundles without charge for the old woman who always lays flowers at the canal shrine when the sun drops. Errands for the return journey pile neatly in the boat. From the reed seller he buys to coils of strips, their edges trimmed to kindness. The willow man has cuttings wrapped in a wet mat, tips left green and hopeful. A stall that handles cord has thin lengths exactly right for tying little gates in the banks. The gardener trades greens for all three and sets them under damp cloth on the shaded side of the boat. He takes a clay whistle for his cousin's child, a small thing that sounds like a bird, and tucks it into a basket corner where it will not learn to crack. Before leaving, he sweeps his mat with his palm, gathers crumbs of leaf and thread of reed, and tips them into a basket destined for the pigs. Waste is a word that stalls like to forget. He dips the cloth once more, glides it over the top layer of greens, and lowers the shade on his hat. The pole, cool where it lay, stands in his hand like a tool that was made for him. The canal receives the boat back with a low slosh. Afternoon light spreads on the water in easy triangles. Traffic moves in a single file that keeps wakes soft along the banks. He holds for a moment at the checkpoint posts, lifts his chin in thanks to the watcher, and is waved on. Beyond, willows draw calm lines that seem to point toward home. Wine comes from the west now, a small help that hardly shows in the pole but eases the mind. He rides the channel at a pace that keeps baskets quiet. On the left, the boy learns to pole. His strokes are short and eager. His mother lets in, then reaches around in to add one long, correct push that steadies the boat. The boy watches without embarrassment. The canal teaches by letting small mistakes pat the bank gently rather than scolding. Near a bend, the reed cutter stands hip deep, stacking lengths on a low raft. The gardener pauses. They trade a bundle of amaranth for a tighter coil of reed strips and a story about herons stealing fish from a careless basket. The story carries laughter 3 boats down, and then becomes a note that dissolves into the evening air. Stories are tied like reed to turns, flat, not easy to open when needed. Water widens and slows near his fields. The willows he set this morning hold their new angle. The tiny gate he closed lies where he left it, wood darker from the hours it spent with water. He pulls alongside the first bed and unloads the errands, stakes to drive, reeds to tie, cord for the little gates. He sets the whistle in the sheet of a soil mat so he will remember to hand it over when the child appears. Work resumes in a quieter key. Stakes are seated with the heel of the palm, not the hammer. Reed edges learn their new knots. The willow cuttings slide into their places and receive a tug to set them right. The leftover herbs, thinned by the day's trade, are scattered in small patches between rows to keep soil cool until dusk. The boat grows lighter, the beds grow moored and grateful. The sun leans, and a coal comes off the water that was not there at noon. The gardener stands on the mat, stretches his back once, and lets his eyes go to the city's edge. Smoke threads straighten as fires think of cooking. Voices gather by the causeway in the easy pile that means return. He dips the cloth and passes it over his wrists, then over the broad leaves nearest the path. The day turns from market to home, and the canals agree. Late afternoon folds over the water with a cooler hand. The sun steps down the sky, and the willows which all day were green columns turn into soft brushes painting longer shadows across the channels. The gardener's boat rests where the bank gives it welcome. He sets the pole snug under the gunwale and steps onto the reed mat with knees that remember the lake's sway. Evening work is patient work, smaller in reach, longer in kindness. He walks the bed crowns once more, soul seeking the firm line where soil has settled and water has kept its word. A fingertip touches the top of a seedling and finds it unbothered. The reed shades are lifted to fingers' width to let the last light visit without scorch. Where the morning's ribbon of mud has dried to a faint skin, he smooths it gently with the side of his palm so the surface will shed a sudden shower instead of letting the first drops dig tiny pits. These are tiny habits, but they keep tomorrow from beginning with repair. On the outer edge, where wind has more courage, a reed bundle needs a new tie. He pulls a cord from the boat thinner than the morning's, better for evenings when work wants quiet hands, and wraps it twice, not tight, and finishes with a flat knot he could find in the dark. He presses the knot under the edge so it won't snag a pole passing by at night. Knots that hide well behave well. He checks the little gates again. One sits where he left it, another has learned to tilt. He straightens it and sets a small pebble at its foot as a reminder. Water levels answer the day's heat with their own opinions, and dusk is when their voices soften back into agreement. At a corner stake, he twists the willow a little deeper, listening with his hands through the wood to the soaked earth around it. The stake answers with a quiet firmness that will keep the bank true through night wind. Harvest that came home from the market for neighbors rests in the boat's shaded belly. He lifts out a handful of greens for an older man who keeps nets at the far bend and leaves them where the man's paddle usually kisses the bank. A sprig of mint is tucked under the damp cloth for the woman with a cough. Errands travel without words on channels like these. Hands finish sentences without the need for sound. Cooking fires wake along the distant causeway, their smoke lying flat in the cool. Near the gardener's bed, a cousin strikes flint on steel and coaxes flame into a handful of dry grass. A small clay tripod receives a pot already carrying the day's smell, maize that has seen lime and water, beans that learn patience, a spoonful of fat. He sets aside two blossoms saved from the gourd and slides them into the pot at the last minute so they will keep their shape. The sound is modest, a simmer that never threatens to boil. The pot has a lid that fits by habit. He turns it a quarter with two fingers, then leaves it to think. The gardener eats simply when the light thins. A tortilla folded around warm greens, a spoon from the pot, a drink of cool water carried in a gourd stoppered with corn husk. He sits with the bowl cupped in both hands and keeps his eyes on the willow line. Even while eating, he reads the bed's darkening where damp rises, lightening where the surface dries, edges holding or asking. Evening is a lesson written in grays. Neighbors pass like punctuation. A quiet couple glides by with a basket of flowers they did not sow, bound for a shrine or a doorstep. A boy leans a little too far to watch fish stir at the bank. His mother draws him back with two fingers and a whisper. A reed cutter lifts a hand, the gardener returns it. No one needs a long call. Voices grow short at dusk so the water can do its own talking. A soft note of custom belongs here. Night on these channels carries rules that are not a law but a courtesy. Boats lower their pace and ride midstream so wakes will not kiss banks into crumble. Poles are set deeper, and pushed with longer rests. Lamps, if carried, are held low and shaded more for hands than for eyes, so insects keep their heads and birds return to roost without confusion. Dogs on the larger islands learn the time and settle. It is a neighborhood of water, and night is the neighbor with seniority. The gardener sets his own small lamp in the boat, a clay cup with a wick that learned short habits. He shields it with a palm when he bends near paper dry leaves. The flame is not for show. It watches his hands and lets them find cord and not in a calmer circle of sight. Or on the beds, the light lands on reed edges and slips off. The lake takes no offense, it keeps most reflections for itself. With dinner finished, he visits the far edge, where a gap between beds invites curious feet. Two new willow cuttings wait in the boat. He presses one down through the soft soil until it tastes water, then pulls it up a thumb's breadth so it can breathe. He ties it gently to a reed stake. By morning the tip will know which way to point. The second cutting rests across its hole while he strings a low line between stakes to ask people to choose the other path. Lines suggest as well as bind. Frogs tune their saws under the banks. A heron pauses, no sound from its wings, only a shadow that briefly edits the water. From the city's edge, a shell trumpet sounds a level tone that seems to speak more to the air than to ears. The gardener checks time by the cool on his forearms and by how clearly the causeway fires draw their ropes of smoke. He does not need a mark on a wall to decide when to tidy and go. He brings the day toward closed in considered circles. The reed shades drop back to their day position so dawn will not find them tangled. The boat's cords are retied without flourish. Tools return to their places, obsidian under wrap, shell edge rinsed and dried, basket brushed with the heel of the hand to lift the last whisper of leaf. The lidded gourd is emptied and set on its ring upside down so the rim will keep its honesty. The pole lies where his foot will meet it tomorrow without looking. Before he leaves, he stands at the corner of the first bed and lets the day play back without pictures, only with touch, the feel of good mud sliding into soil. The weight of reed ties when they are right, the slight tug of a well-seated stake. The resistance of water when a gate asks to close. He lifts his chin toward the willow line as if greeting a person and hears, in reply, only frogs and a soft stir where a fish thinks of something. A modest aside, spoken like a lullaby. Places such as these stayed alive by shared tending, channels cleared in rotation, banks mended in company. Water allotted not by argument but by turns written in sticks and memory. Night was not an ending, but a long comma. Sleep came knowing that neighbors would keep the same pace tomorrow. Pole lengths apart, and never far in intent. The lamp is pinched. The wick smokes once, then stops. He pushes the boat from the bank with a boot that knows the exact pressure the reed edge can welcome. The bow swings into the center lane. He keeps the stroke long and slow, letting the lake draw its own lines under the hull. Houses on the larger islands show small lamp holes, kitchens darken one by one. The sky loses blue and gains a calm that is not yet black. At his landing, he loops the cord twice around the stake and leaves the knot loose enough that morning hands will smile. The basket and pole come ashore. A jar of leftover water is poured along a bed's crown, not much, just a gesture that keeps soil surface friendly for the first light. He turns once to see the beds as they prefer to be seen at night, quiet, even, ready. He steps to the path that leads home. Behind him, the lake says almost nothing. That is how it offers permission to rest. Night comes without argument. The lake spreads a darker ink, and the willows lift their shadows into larger shapes. Houses on the bigger islands keep a few lamps. But the channels prefer a softer rule. Steps grow careful, voices shorten, even oars. When they appear, learn to kiss the water rather than tap it. The gardener's home sits where four beds meet, a small room of reed and wood set back from the edge. A low platform holds sleeping mats rolled for air. A pot sits upside down beside the hearth to keep spiders from thinking it a cave. The door stands on its latch, not locked because neighbors are nearer than strangers, and the water is its own gate. He puts away the day's tools, obsidian flake wrapped in cloth, planting stick leaned in its corner, basket brushed clean with the palm, and sets a small lamp near the threshold. The wick is trimmed short. The flame learns to be modest. The evening watch is shared, a habit rather than a duty. Tonight it is his turn for the second round, when the moon rises enough to teach the channels silver. He sleeps early in a light doze, back warm to the reed wall, waking to his own name in a whisper. A cousin stands just outside, hat brim low, a pole in hand. They trade places without ceremony. One lies down. The other lifts the pole and the small lamp with its clay dish, and steps to the boat that has learned both feet. The watch is not a march, but a glide along the bed's margins. He keeps midstream so his wake will nudge nothing. The lamp sits low in the boat, shielded by his palm when the wind carries a thought. Light spills just enough to find reeds, and reed knots. Frogs speak in the banks. Somewhere a night bird drops and rises. He listens, not for drama, only for the ordinary, a gate that chatters against its post, a new gap where a corner should sit square, a troubled sound at a willow that might mean a tether once persuading. He stops at the first little gate and lays the pole across the bow. Water has crept up a finger beyond kindness. He slides the small board a notch toward closed. The surface shows a ring under lamp glow, and then grows still. He waits a count of 10 and watches the line along the bed's edge settle where he likes it. Night adjustments are small. They keep morning from needing large ones. At a corner stake, his hand reads a slant in the wood. He turns the willow down a thumb's breadth and ties a single loop of cord to invite the stake to remember. The knot lies on the water side so it will swell and hold by dawn. Reeds at one edge have shifted, their ties learned loose by the day's many wakes. He brings the boat close, palms the ends flat, and gives the knot to turns that will release into pulls when the sun returns. The sound is only reed on reed, almost no sound at all. A neighbor glides from the opposite direction, shadow wide, hat dark, lamp the same low pearl. The boats pause bow to bow. They speak in the lake's grammar, chin raised, hand flicked once toward a line of beds, a small curve traced in the air to mean water moving here. He nods, answers with a pinch gesture for wick short, and they drift apart, each boat a comma in the same sentence. At mid-channel a fish breaks the skin with a soft pop. He rests the pole and slides his palm over the lamp rim to set the flame lower for a stretch. Insects thicken near the reeds when light grows careless. A cool arrives from the open lake, flattening water into an easy plate. The beds look like careful stitches on cloth. His shoulders relax to the old pace. The watch is only another form of gardening. A gentle aside belongs here. Fields on water live by agreement more than by fences. People near one another share turns at clearing channels, trade reed strips without counting, prop each other's beds when wind has scolded. Night rounds make this agreement visible. They turn. Someone chewed into I did, and it was easy, which is a kind gift to the morning. He reaches the far bend where a larger spill brings lake water among the beds. To willow cuttings set earlier by another hand lean as if listening the wrong way. He writes them, pressing down and drawing up until the tips face the useful star. He sets a small willow leaf at the tie as a promise to check again at dawn. The leaf will brown by then, and its change will tug his eye. The lamp burns down. He tilts the dish to pool oil toward the wick and trims the char with a fingernail. The flame answers with a steady purl again. He returns the boat along the main run and pauses once more midstream. Lakeside rooms have gone quiet. One laugh carries and falls. Dogs on the causeway arrange themselves to sleep. The moon rides a hand's width above the willow tops and teaches the channels a white path with a broken edge. Near home, he dims the lamp and lets his eyes adjust. The beds closest to his house hold their shapes, as if taking pride. He slides into his steak's familiar loop, sets the lamp inside the door to cool, and tries the nut on the gate by touch alone. It lies as he left it. The cousin inside raises his head, hears the quiet version of good news, and sinks again. He sleeps in small pieces that join into a whole. Dreams taste like cool water and the push of a pole. When first light thins the dark, a shape passes the door, someone else turning in the last watch, the shared rhythm continuing without speech. The room takes on the pale color that means east is listening. A kettle receives water and sits on 3 stones. A lid hums once and settles. Dawn builds in gentle layers. The first sound is a wooden rattle far away, not a call, more a check that the path is clear. The second is a slow swish where a reed broom teaches a porch to be neat. A pot lid lifts and returns. A child tries the clay whistle he got yesterday. A frog answers by accident. The lake itself makes its small voice water talk against reed, the sound of a sleeve overwoven mat, the quiet of knots choosing to be strong for another day. He opens the door, and cool air comes in as if it knew the room. The boat waits with its usual patience. He touches the pole, counts the jobs waiting in front of him without turning them into a list, move the reed shades up a finger, shift a ribbon of mud where yesterday taught, tie the corner that likes to forget, take a small harvest for a neighbor who fed his fire all night. The work is not new, and that is its comfort. He steps onto the path. Dew holds at the willow feet and slips away under his soles. The first gate opens a breath. A dragonfly makes an arrow across the morning. He presses the planting stick into soil and lifts it again to feel the good weight. It is the start of the saying, and the saying today feels like a kindness. The channel gathers new boats with quiet bows. People nod and pass. The market will wake later. For now the beds breathe, the water behaves, and the gardener lets his hands meet the day at the pace the lake prefers. And as the lake folds itself back into the day, we will change seasons and climates. The water will harden to a bright pain, and footsteps will sound like careful drums. Before sunrise, the cold has already done its work. The pond lies level and faintly blue, a calm sheet that remembers the last wind, but no longer move with it. Frost makes the shore grass pale. A thin path across the meadow leads to the landing, where sled runners wait in a row and a broad push broom leans against the fence as if it slept standing. The world sounds small boot leather on snow, a harness buckle answering itself, the soft clink of iron teeth in a wooden tray. Two figures cross to the water's edge without discussing anything they do not need. The air holds their breath and sets it aside like steam over a kettle. One lifts a long-handled spud, a chisel with a simple mind, and taps the ice near the landing. The sound is clean and round. He leans, tests again, and the iron finds willing depth. A second tool, a short auger with a wooden crossbar, turns in careful hands. When it lifts, the hole shines, and the ice's thickness shows itself in a ring that pleases the eye. No one says a number. The sound and the cross-section together already give enough comfort. Snow from yesterday lies thin on the surface, not heavy. A wide wooden scraper, nothing more than a plank with a lip, and two handles, slides out over the pond pushed by steady shoulders. The first pass draws a path to the right, then another, until a corridor of clean ice appears like a track laid for a slow race. Scraped snow rises in light walls to the sides and waits there. Under the skim, the ice shows a soft green and tiny trapped bubbles that look like stars in a daytime sky. A horse stands in a simple collar and hangs, harness quiet, breath white and regular. The marker plow behind him is not a plow as a field knows it. It is a low sled with a box of iron teeth set at even intervals. The teeth do not cut through. They only scratch long, shallow lines the way a pencil would, teaching later tools where to work. A hand spins to thumb screws to set the spacing. Today, blocks will be sized to suit the slide on the far bank and the icehouse door. Small differences matter later in the day. The setting is double-checked now so no one has to argue with a doorway in the dark. The man at the horse's head speaks almost nothing, only touches a cheek strap and steps forward. Hoofs sound like hollow drums on the hard surface, unhurried and even. The iron teeth whisper. A pale line grows under the sled, bright against the green. At the end of the first run, the horse turns in a slow arc that keeps the traces friendly. Another run. Another. A grid begins parallel lanes first, cross lines later, straight enough to satisfy a level, true enough to lead a saw. At the landing, a second pair works in the short shade cast by the oak tree. They prepare the runway, a channel from open water to the staging area, so the day's first blocks will have a path toward the bank. The spud delivers a pattern: tap, set, lift, and the skin loosens. A broad pike iron spear with a small hook nudges slabs aside. The water showing in the cut looks black only because it is honest. It waits for a little more help, then stills again as edges freeze to a thin lace. Gentle side note, offered like a sleeve straightened in passing. In winters like these, people gathered and kept cold the way they might keep grain. Ponds and lakes near towns became quiet factories for solid water. Blocks traveled wrapped in sawdust and straw to cellars and ice houses, then into summer, where they lay inside boxes lined with tin and made milk safe and fruit kind. The work here looks like labor. It is also a kind of bank that saves cool for months that forget it. The sun shows a rim behind the spruce. No one hurries it. Light lifts the color out of the ice until it seems less green and more pale gray. The marking goes on. The horse steps along the next lane of the grid and pauses when a mittened hand rests briefly against his shoulder. The pause is not for conversation. It lets the man check the iron box. Teeth should scratch, not bite. He brushes rime from the sled runners with the back of a glove so they will glide as willingly at noon as they do now. A boy nearly tall enough to be called something else pushes the scraper along a path the horse has already walked. He follows the bright line and clears powder from it so the saws will later find their work without Snow telling lies about where the cut should sit. The scraper's lip sings a small, dry note. Every third push he lifts the blade to shake off what it has gathered, then sets it back down gently so the edge will not chatter. When the first rectangle in the grid reaches a certain dullness at the cross lines, one of the men kneels and drives a thin iron grater into the shallow grooves. He rocks it slightly to deepen the path. The tool is not sharp in the way of knives, it is persistent. A few pauses convince the grooves to accept the idea that something more will happen later. He stands, rubs a sleeve over the place where his breath landed on the scarf, and looks toward the far bank where the icehouse's dark shape waits against the snow. Another team arrives on the shore, 2 men with a timber sled and a handsaw taller than a seated child. They walk on worn paths across the pond, boots scuffing faintly. Greetings are short and friendly. One man lifts the saw and tests its teeth with a thumbnail, not to threaten them, only to feel the pattern. He draws the blade sideways through the first marked channel and listens. The sound matters as much as the look. A good saw sings, a dull one argues. This one sounds willing. Warmth is tended to. A small fire in a sheet iron box lights near the landing, not on the ice, but on the bank high enough that no stray ash will land where it should not. Tin cups rest upside down on a board to keep their lips clean of snow while they wait. A kettle sits with its lid at a friendly angle so steam will not look for other work to do. Woolen mitts are turned side to side in the pale sun so the cloth can forget the last hour's frost. The grid spreads. What was a smooth white plane becomes a quiet notebook of faint long lines and careful squares, each the size a shoulder can manage and a ramp can bear. The horse turns and turns again until the hoof prints make their own soft pattern. When the last cross line meets the last lane and the acre near the landing looks like a woven thing, the man at the horse's head runs a palm along the warm neck, unhooks the traces, and leads the animal to the hay set aside under canvas. The plow sled rests with its iron teeth lifted out of the cold into air. The pond answers the morning with tiny sounds, now ice settling as it meets sun, water sighing in the runway cut, iron tapping wood as tools are set down rather than dropped. The men stand for a moment and look at the day they have arranged. It is not pride in the loud sense. It is recognition that the rest will go easier because the first has gone correctly. A last check closes the opening aisle. The auger turns once more at the edge of the runway. The ring shows a thickness that still speaks of safety. A mittened thumb rubs the rim clean. The boy sweeps a final dusting of snow from the nearest lines and sets the broom against the sled where a hand will find it without looking. The saw is lifted, and the first real cut will begin. The first cut takes its time, as it should. The tall saw stands at a shallow angle, teeth resting in the bright groove the marker plow left. 2 hands hold the crossbar, one mittened palm guides the blades back where it rises and sinks. The stroke is long, even, and without force the saw is allowed to do the work it was shaped to do. Ice answers with a steady hiss and a soft, granular squeak that means the teeth are meeting honest cold, not slush and not air. The second man kneels with the grater and deepens the neighboring line. He rocks the iron gently, length over length, feeling for that slight looseness that says the groove is ready to accept a saw without wandering. A boy keeps his scraper moving ahead of both, lifting the lightest skin of snow so edges remain clear. Every few passes, the sawyer pauses, lifts the blade and brushes the teeth clean with the back of a glove. The tiny crystals fall in a neat stripe and shine like salt. A rhythm finds itself. Saw down half a span, grater along the next seam, scraper to quick steps to keep the awl neat, then the saw again, deeper this time. Breath settles into the pace. Shoulders learn which muscle must wake, which can rest. No calls are needed. A nod serves, or the brief lift of a mitten, or the angle of the saw blade held upright to ask for a moment. When the first seam reaches a depth that satisfies the sawyer close to, but never through, he sets the tool aside on its runner so the blade will not kiss the ice and dull. The spud returns, chisel tip testing each corner in turn. A thin iron bar with a modest shoulder called a breaker slides between to deepen grooves. The man leans with his weight, then eases off, then leans again, coaxing rather than forcing. A sound like a long breath leaves the ice. The block shoes a line across its end and lifts a fraction within its bed. Ready, the breaker could say if it spoke. The pike poles come forward, long wooden shafts with a sharp point and a small hook. Tips find the block's far edge, the hook set just enough to guide, not gouge. A small pry, a slight pull, and the rectangle rises, floats a thumb above its bed, and rocks once before becoming a settled thing with its own calm. It is heavy, but in water it carries itself as if it remembered being part of the pond and doesn't resent being asked to travel. Blocks come free along the first lane and are turned with the pike so their cut sides face cut sides, unmarked faces to unmarked faces. A pair will slide more willingly than a single. To become four, become a small raft that keeps its corners true. The men use their poles like quiet oars, nudging the gathering pieces toward the runway where open water waits in a black strip. The current under the ice slow, polite helps a little. It suggests the direction rather than pushing. A gentle safety habit lives inside each gesture. Boots step where the grid is widest. No one crowds the lip of a new seam. The boy learns to keep the scraper's handle angled so, if it slips, it will go forward, not back toward a shin. A small coil of rope rides in a heap near the landing. No one names it aloud. It simply sits ready, its end fed through itself so a loop will bite quickly if asked. By the second seam, the saw has warmed to its line. The blade leans more upright, the teeth throw a finer dust. The man at the grater works 2 lanes ahead now, giving the sawyer a clear path. The breaker makes quick work of the last inch or 2, feeling for any place the seam wants a patient tap rather than a push. When a stubbornness shows, the spud returns with a single, telling blow, and the block consents to float. The horse wakes to work again, but not with the marker plow. He is hitched to a low, flat sled with a hinged tail, a simple draw that skims the ice and then meets the bank. A chain lies ready at its nose. The runway opened at dawn receives the first raft of blocks. Pikes hold them together, point and hook persuading corners not to argue. The sled's tail dips into the water like a tongue, the raft kisses it, and then each block, one by one, learns to slide up a plane into air. Edges drip and stiffen. The men's hands thick with wool and leather find corners that will not bruise. They turn each block so the smooth faces meet the sled, not the rough. Friction prefers the plain side. A wooden lever helps the last third of the ride, its foot padded so it will not bite the ice. Blocks gather on the sled in tidy ranks, 3 across, 3 deep, a layer that reads like a little wall. 2 men lean in, the horse takes the wordless cue, the sled glides onto the pond, over the scraped path, and then toward the shore where the slide waits. But the slide tall timbers forming an inclined plane up to the icehouse mouth will sing its song later. First, more lanes must open. The grid must become water in ordered strips so rafts have room to form. The sawyer carries his blade to the next groove. His partner grades ahead, then kneels a moment to warm his fingers over his own breath before the iron returns to work. The boy's scraper keeps up, methodical as a metronome. A small aside fits here, like a margin note in a ledger. Ice is not simply cut and hauled. Each block is a unit in an arithmetic that favors future ease. If today's pieces are sized well, tomorrow's stacking inside sawdust will be simple. If the runway is kept clean, the slide will not need someone to argue with friction while hands grow cold. Seasoned crews do not chase speed, they equalize effort. Mid-morning steadies the men with hot drink from the shore. Tin cups wake to their own warmth. Bread, thickly sliced and spread with something that does not freeze into stingy hardness, passes hand to hand. No one sits long. The kettle lid is set back on the box stove at a careful tilt so it will not rattle when wind visits. Mitts turn over to keep their inner woe-kind. Back on the ice, the first open strip now looks like a narrow canal. Blocks and pairs slide within it as if the lane had always been meant for them. The pike points poke, the hooks draw, and the little rafts form like polite thoughts. At the runway's mouth, a man with a short-handled gaff more hooked than spear stands ready to pull each block square to the sled tail. He does not yak. He draws with a patient, low arc that sets the block true. The horse steps a half step and waits. He has learned this too. A few imperfections present themselves as the day allows. A seam wanders where the marker met a hidden ripple. The saw answers by angling back a shade. The grader returns to deepen the true line. The wrong cut is allowed to live only as far as it has to. Elsewhere, the ice shows a cloudy layer halfway down where yesterday's snow melted and froze again. The saw strokes shorten their teeth, working with less eagerness. The breaker leans more slowly. The block still floats, only with a slightly different mind. The men note it, adjust, and move on. Nothing here is a surprise, everything is a variant. The runway fills with a brief queue, a raft waiting its turn while the sled rises with its neat 9. The men laid pikes across the blocks like rails to keep them companionable. A mitten taps the tail chain to shake off the small cuff of ice forming there. The sled tilts up the bank, runners thrum softly, the tail lifts free of water with a sound like fabric. When the sled returns, it rides lower, the horse blowing slow fob. A hand rubs his neck through the collar. He leans his head into the palm and then looks toward the pond as if to say he knows his lines for the next pass. Harness leather creaks a friendly answer. The chain sings once when it takes weight, and off they go again, the iron shoes corks catching on ice where necessary, the stride still conservative and exact. By late morning the working field has changed character. The grid that was potential has become a pattern of water and ice, lanes and islets, each ready to shift from solid to cargo as the saws decide. The men move within it the way a practice hand moves over a board with tools set out just so. The day's plan is not spoken. It is kept in the neatness of the lanes, the calm of the runway, and the way blocks arrive at the bank already oriented for the slide. A last glance sweeps the field before the first load climbs the tall timbers. The grader's iron rests on its hook. The saw stands on its runners, blade wiped with a cloth so crystals will not gnaw the teeth while it pauses. The pike poles lean together like tall reeds. The kettle whispers on the bank stove. The men step toward the slide, where the steady, pleasing clatter of timber and ice will begin to count the day. The slide wakes with a small clatter, and then finds its voice. Timbers rise from the bank to the icehouse mouth like a patient ladder, each rung faced with iron so runners will glide. At the foot, the sled eases into place, tail just kissing the open water. A man with a short gaff draws the first block square. Another settles a wooden bar across it like a hand cupped over a shoulder. A third nods toward the horse. One step, then another, and the load begins to climb. Blocks speak in a language of soft knocks. Iron shoes click, timbers answer, and a faint ring passes along the rails as weight trades from one crosspiece to the next. The men walk beside the sled, not pulling, only guarding. They touch corners, nudge a mischief-minded block back into honest line, and steady the tail when the incline steepens. Breath shows fades, and shoes again. Nothing hurries. Nothing stalls. At the top, a house of winter waits wooden walls, shaded eaves, a door raised above ground to keep summer out later, not winter now. Inside, the air holds a clean dryness, a little resin from the timbers, and the faint sweetness of last season's sawdust. A ramp lets the sled slide a final short way to the stacking floor. Men take positions they keep all season, to lift, one to place, one to carry sawdust and spread it where it must be. No one explains. The floor already remembers their feet. The first block leaves the sled and learns its corner. Hands in thick mitts do what bare fingers would do in June, feel for true, read by touch, turn until right only through wool. The block sits flat, then meets its neighbors with a gap no wider than a thumb. Another row, then another. An aisle is kept where the next lift will pass. The stack grows like a wall that intends to stay friendly. Sawdust begins its careful work. A man tips a sack and spreads a soft rein over the top layer, not thick, not stingy. It slides into seams and lies kindly against edges. He works it with a short board, just as a baker works flour into a bench, never pressing, only laying. The smell is forest and quiet. Later, long after the pond has forgotten this day, the same dust will remember to keep summer's heat from licking too quickly at the ice. A gentle aside fits here. Sawdust is the winter keeper's quilt. Dry chips trap still air, and still air is the truest insulator a simple shop can afford. Houses that store ice carefully alternate layers ice, dust leaving channels where air can move enough to avoid sweat but not enough to invite melt. The craft is not in thickness alone, it is in the places left open as much as in the places filled. Back outside, The incline receives another sled. The horse leans and rests in a rhythm he learned long ago. Between pulls a nose bag finds him, and he thanks it without stopping to say so. A bow brushes frost from the chain where it meets the drawbar so ice will not sit there and learn to be a nuisance. A mitten wipes the rail to lift the thin rime that grew while the sled was gone. Clean metal sings, furred metal hums. The slide prefers the song. On the pond, the lanes lengthen. The saw moves with a confidence that comes when the tool and the man agree. The grader stays to seams ahead, making the path truthful. The breaker chooses when to push and when to persuade. Pikes keep rafts companionable. A block that wants to spin is taught to be social with a low, patient hook. The runway's open water stays open because a man with a shovel keeps the thin lace of new ice from knitting where the sled tail drinks. In the ice house, the stack develops manners. Aisles remain wide enough for a man with a sack of sawdust on his shoulder. Layers stagger so no seam travels unbroken from side to side. At each third tier, a narrow airway is left like a book's gutter, running from door to back wall. The man with the short board walks these paths and tests with the back of his hand. If the air feels tight, he parts the dust a finger's breadth. If it feels lively, he returns and lays a little more. He does not measure with numbers. He measures with how the room breathes. Lunch comes as a pause that does not ask for chairs. On the bank, bread, a slab of cold meat that does not resent the name, pickles that remind the mouth of summer. In the house, a moment standing by the doorway, mitts resting on a rail, eyes reading the stacks. The kettle offers another round, the lid goes back to its tilt, the small stove inside the shed declines to roar. Heat is not the point. Warm hands are. Afternoon settles into its arithmetic. 9 on the sled, 3 sleds per hour when the lines run clean, a dozen trips before light loses its edge. No one speaks these sums, but the incline counts for them clack, 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 and the floor assigns places as dependably as a ledger that balances itself. A new man joins, stepping into a spot at the saw. He tests the teeth, sets the blade, and finds the groove where his breath can join the pong's low hiss. A few small problems appear and pass like clouds. A block shows a hairline split. It is turned to the middle of the stack where neighbors will hold it gentle. A wedge of ice lodges under a runner. At the foot of the slide, a hammer taps the timber once. The wedge leaps free, and the rail sings again. The boy's scraper loses a bolt. The older man finds a spare in a pocket where such things live in winter and tightens it with a round stone because the wrench is across the pond. Good enough is good enough when used with care. Like thins. The pond turns from pale green to flat pewter. The grid narrows as the nearest lanes become open water, and the work moves outward from the runway. The old rule returns. No one walks where there is no habit. Paths are kept where paths have already proved themselves. The horse is led along the shore a little more often, not for show, but so his legs will not grow too clever on ice that has begun to learn the day's fatigue. He knows his way back to the hay, but he waits to be told. The waiting is its own comfort. Inside the ice house, the last layers for the day receive a more generous dusting. Edges get extra, corners get extra, and the door frame learns a soft slope of chips so cold will not tumble out in a gush when it opens tomorrow. A plank stands near the doorway to be laid across the threshold for the night. making a sill that drafts will choose to ignore. The man with the board pats the top of the final tier as if to say, "It will be fine." The tier says nothing, which is agreement enough. A simple tally is made in a pencil that has seen better summers: sleds, stacks, one small repair to a rail, one saw set home for a new set of teeth, one runner greased with tallow at the hinge. The numbers are plain. The paper lives in a pocket that knows this weight. A thumb rubs the page to press the graphite into the fibers so it will not forget the count on a damp day. The incline quiets itself when the horse is loosed. A man walks the rail with a rag, lifting the day's thin frost where it has gathered where hands often rest. The chain is hung so it will not lie in its own way. The sled tail is raised out of the runway, and a board is laid across the opening to remind the water not to make mischief while no one is looking. Back on the pond, the soy is wiped, the grader leans on its hook, the breaker lies with its shoulder to the timber, and pikes rest point down in the snow, hooks turned inward. The boy pushes the scraper one last time across the nearest seam, not because it must be clean now, but because it feels right to set the next day's first path. He props the broom by the fence where the morning can find it without any mind. Shadows dust the meadow. The ice-house door goes to with a padded thud, then opens a hand's width again to let the first breath of settling air move. It will be blocked only when the last man leaves. In the shed, the little stove is allowed to go out, its lid placed square. Tin cups turn upside down and steam lightly into air that no longer minds. Harness is hung so the leather will dry straight. A curry comb passes once along a warm neck. The horse rolls one eye and relaxes. Work remembered and already put away. The men stand a short minute at the bank, looking not at the pond but at their hands. They flex fingers until warmth returns. They say little. One mentions weather coming from the west as if telling how a friend will behave tomorrow. That? Others nod. The tools say nothing at all. It is enough. By late afternoon the light thins to a lavender band along the tree line. The pond turns pewter again, and the open lanes red as darker ink between islands of scored ice. The slide takes one last load with the easy clatter it has learned all day, then quiets. A board slips across the runway mouth so black water won't make decisions on its own. The horse drops his head into the nose bag and thinks only of oats. Puts knock snow from their hens on the bank, each man reading his souls by feel. Work does not end at the door of the house. Wagons arrive from the Sama with fresh sawdust, the kind that smells of pine and keeps its dryness even when air weaves damp through evening. Iron rim wheels come down the rutted road with a slow, considered crunch. Teamsters keep a gentle hand on lines. A sudden stop makes dust leap, and dust is a thing to carry, not chase. A lantern hangs from the wagon's side, hooded, so light pours on the ground and not into the eyes of horses that already know their footing. The ice house gives itself away by breath. When the high doors open, a cool sigh moved past cheeks and collars. Inside, stacks stand in tidy tiers beneath a soft topcoat of chips, aisles left wide enough for shoulders and sacks. A loft door creaks above. A man tips a canvas moth over a short chute. Dust slides down in a gold-brown ribbon. Below, another spreads it with the short board, edge turned slightly to lay rather than press. The dust sound is a whispered dry rain meeting winter. Scarves come up over noses while new dust finds its place. No one hurries. A lamp hangs from a hook on a beam, its glass trimmed clean and its flame drawn down small. In this house, warmth lives only in hands. Air prefers to stay what it is. A small vent in the gable stands open to fingers. The keeper lifts it another finger's worth, then waits with his palm near the top tier to feel the room change. When a breath of air moves along the aisle, he closes the vent a single thumb's width. The house is managed less like a chest and more like a set of lungs, enough exchange to carry damp away. Not so much that outside weather comes to stay. Out on the bank the last of the day's timber sleds shift their rolls. One is harnessed for road work, the team's traces shortened, and their collars checked for the drag of hills ahead. A load of empty sacks and burlap rolls will go back to the mill. They'll come home tomorrow with more dust. The road bends past a low brook and climbs a little rise where wind cuts across. Men walk the steeper parts, hands on the sled's back-bowed boots, finding the worn places where crust holes. Lantern light shows ruts like shallow rivers frozen mid-thaw. At the mill a saw sings through boards behind closed doors. The keeper there has set aside a dry corner where dust cures above the floor on slats. The sacks fill with a soft thump, then are tied with a round turn that will not slip when jostled. A mark of charcoal 2 lines. A dot says where this batch will sleep in the icehouse tiers. Back on the road the load rides low and quiet. A team stops once at the little bridge so hooves can count the planks, then the slope yields, and the icehouse comes into view again like a barn that remembers summer. Inside, men check small things that accumulate into largies. Where a stack shows a shallow hollow, dust is lifted from the aisle, shaken through fingers, and laid back as a gentle reach. Where a corner feels eager, a wooden wedge slips under the lowest block to invite a truer sit. A chalk mark on a beam reads the day's count, a second line waits for tomorrow's. Near the door, a low sill of chips keeps cold from rushing out when latch and hinge answer dawn. A quiet aside belongs here. Houses like this were built to wait. In months when fields forgot green, people saved winter in meat. Breathable squares so milk could keep its courage in July, and fish could be honest through an afternoon. The building does not boast. It only stays dry, holds still air, and remembers to exhale when the world goes heavy. Tools earn their end-of-day kindness. The long saw lies across 2 pegs. Its teeth are cleaned with a stiff brush, then dressed with a file that lives in a wooden sheath. The file speaks a fine, even note 1, 2, 3 strokes per tooth until the set matches the morning's. A small oilstone touches the grater's edge. The breaker's shoulder sees a dab of tallow where it rubbed at noon. Pikes are wiped and hung with hooks turned inward so no sleeve meets surprise in the dark. The boy carries the scraper to the bench near the stove in the shed. A nut tightened there at midday is checked again. A nail that did a day's work is replaced with a bolt that will do a month's. He warms his mitts on the stove's flank and turns them so steam leaves both sides. A second kettle plain water gives the brush and file a civilized wash. Tin cups rest upside down on a clean board, waiting for tomorrow's first pour. Outside, dusk goes blue, then blue-gray. A ring sits faint around the moon, a weather sign men read without pointing. Snow soon, someone says in the tone people use for errands, not for warnings. Plants shift a finger's width. Scrapers will walk out early if flakes begin by dawn. The horse will pull the marker in close lanes, not long, and the slide will be swept more often so the rails do not learn a fur coat. A wagon peels off toward town with a small load. The grocer ordered ice for his back room, and it is a kindness to send a few fresh blocks while road ruts are friendly. The pieces ride in a shallow box within the sled, wrapped in new dust, and the blankets stitched from old feed sacks. The driver keeps to the quieter lane where shoes find sand and not glare. In the lamplight of the shop, blocks slip onto a floor already sprinkled with chips. A grate holds the melt in a shallow trough that leads outside. Doors close. The grocer tips his hat as if thanking a guest for arriving willingly. Back at the pond, men pull the high door of the ice house to, then leave it a hand's width so the room can settle before full close. A short bar will fall across when the last lantern is pinched. The slide is covered with a scrap of canvas so hoarfrost will have to work harder to claim it overnight. Harness hangs on pegs in the shed, bellied bands loosened, traces draped wide so leather will dry straight. The horse shakes once and breathes out a line of fog that means enough for now. Home keeps a different silence. Boots rest cheek by cheek on a rack near the door. Wool dries on a cord above the stove, turning slowly with any draft. A table holds a pan of potatoes, a crock of pickles, and a heel of bread that tastes of last autumn. Hands wash in a basin where ice chips snapped from cuffs melt without complaint. A small file and lamp migrate to the corner, and a saw's spare blade is set across knees for a few teeth that asked to be reminded of their job. The lamplight sits at a drowsy height. Words sit lower still. Before sleep, someone steps outside to read the night without eyes, just by cheek and ear. The wind has shifted a quarter. The ring around the moon holds. Snow is a fair bet. He drops the latch, slides the bolt, and sets the broom with its head up, not down, so straw will remember its shape. Morning will find all this where it wants to be. The pond, dark now, holds its own counsel. Under the thin board at the runway, water moves the smallest amount, testing the edges of its permission. The ice house breathes once through the gable, then rests. On the road, ruts shine briefly where a lantern passes, and are quiet again. The day's plan has folded into the night's keeping. Hands cool, then warm, shoulders unlearn the weight of a saw. A quilt rises and falls. Snow begins like a suggestion. A few broad flakes tilt through the air, then a few more, landing with a soft tick on wool and a soft hush on the pond. Morning is gray in a comfortable way, sky and ice listening to one another. Boots find their places on the bank. A mitten presses the fence post to feel for frost. The horse snorts once and lowers his head to the collar as if to say the day can start. The first tool is not the saw. It is the broom with its wide straw head and a patience that belongs to winter. The boy pushes a clean path to the landing, then onto the ice along yesterday's closest lanes. Snow, still powder, leaves willingly. Where it clumps, a wooden scraper with a low lip follows and carries it aside into quiet ridges. The pond underneath shows the faint bright grid that remembers yesterday's lines. The men nod without comment. A plan that was correct yesterday is correct today, only slower. Thickness is read again by auger and ear. The whole lifts its clean ring, the sound comes up round a note with enough body to satisfy boots and horse. Snow rides the surface like a light blanket, comforting, but not trusted. The men shorten their strides, set the sawed teeth into the groove, and let the tool travel with a shorter breath. The wake of each stroke throws a fine powder that clings to cuffs. A hand pats it away before it learns to melt and make mischief. The horse pulls the mocker, but in small squares now, near the bank where snow can be managed and the runway stays close. The teeth scratch without ambition, only far enough to teach the blade where it belongs. The boy follows with the broom like punctuation 1, 2, pause, shake, set. His cheeks redden, his breath rasps lightly, and his pride shows only in the way the broom lands square at the end of each push. When the first lane opens, the breaker leans in with care rather than force. Snow at the edges is brushed off before the iron meets ice. Trapped wet would only freeze wrong where the seam should stay honest. The block loosens with a sigh that reads softer under snow. Pikes take their places. Hooks hold a shade longer at each turn so the raft won't wander in the small current that seems to grow when the surface is hidden. The runway drinks a little, stays clear, and the sled tail receives the first blue blocks of the day. At the slide, snow is brushed from rails before the horse is asked to lean. A glove back wipes the chain where rhyme tries to live. The sled climbs, the incline answers with a polite clatter muted by snow and the timbers grain. Inside the icehouse, the dust team breathes through cloths. Sacks that came on last evening's wagon lift easily. Dry shavings slide down the short chute and rest in their new places. Stacking shifts into winter's final figures. Tiers near the door fill first today, the back waits cooler for tomorrow. Owls remain honest, thence stay a hand's width. The man with the short board moves as if smoothing a page. He leaves a little more dust at corners where spring will someday think to pry. He marks a stack with a thumb of charcoal 2 lines and a small circle to say packed on the snow day, which in a few months will remind hands which blocks kept best. A small aside belongs here. When snow arrives on a harvest day, the work becomes more about housekeeping than about count. Snow is welcomed as future water, but today is a sly partner, eager to turn dust to paste and rails to fur. Crews answer not by racing, but by narrowing the safe lanes, the reliable lifts, the nearer stacks. Winter kept by caution lasts longer when summer comes to ask for it. Midday offers heat in small domestic proofs. The stove in the shed ticks softly. Tin cups warm palms more than mouths. A pot appears with something that was stew yesterday and is still stew today. Thicker and kind, bread remembers the knife. Midst turn, steam rises through wool. And the smell of pine dust leans in the doorway without being rude. Afternoon is a repetition with minor edits. Saw in groove, breaker coaxing, pikes arranging, sled climbing. The boy's broom learns to work outward and fans so snow ridges sit where boots won't meet them on the return. The horse keeps his step measured, never clever. At the runway, a board is lifted and set back twice each arc to clear lace where black water leans toward white. The auger visits often, not to worry, only to confirm. A block shows a seam that will not be a friend in July. It goes to the stack's waist, where neighbors will hug it into usefulness. Another shows a cloudy layer that wants the middle of a tier rather than the top. The man with the short board knows where to send such pieces and why. He does not explain. His mitt points, hands lift, the block learns its home. By late day, the grid field has contracted to a sensible room close to the bank lanes finished, open water controlled, the slide swept clear one more time. The last sled rides up, iron tapping timbers in an unhurried count 1, 2, 3 and then 9 and glides onto the floor. blocks leave for their corners. Dust lays down its last thin blanket of the day. The horse's harness isn't snapped with the same care as at dawn. A currycomb answers the back fret where sweat met leather. The nose bag returns. The head lowers. A breath of oats and cold air makes a brief cloud. Closing the season is not a bell. It is a list of gestures done in a certain order. Rails are wiped, chain is hung high, the slide tail lifts above water, a plank crosses the runway, the broom stands bristles up to keep its shape. In the ice house, vents draw a finger narrower. A plank is set across the door from inside, then lifted again to leave the first settling breath its chance. A chalk tally on the beam gains a line. A stub of pencil goes back to its nail on the post. Tools earn their sleep. The saw is brushed and oiled where steel meets wood. The grater's edge sees to passes on the oilstone, and no more. The breaker's shoulder is rubbed with a cloth that knows tallow's measure. Pikes hang hooks inward in the shed shadow, shy of sleeves. The boy kneels to tighten the scraper's bolt one last time. It will not thank him, but it will betray him less in March when one more clean day asks for its talent. A wagon leaves for town with a modest gift for the hospital for blocks wrapped in dust and burlap, tied with a flat knot that opens into pulls. The driver keeps his lamp low and his lines easy. The grocer, the fishmonger, and the boarding-house kitchen will have their rounds soon enough. Tonight, the road keeps its smaller promise. Snow thickens but stays peaceable. The men stand in it for a breath, faces turned up. Enough, one says, meaning work and weather both. They close the ice house door to 3 fingers, then to 1, then to shut. The latch seats without noise. Inside, chips soften their edges and become a soft roof. The stacks breathe once, as any room does when a door goes home, and then keep their cold in the polite silence they will hold until heat knocks in July. Lights in houses along the road find their windows. Boots unlace. Leather relaxes near stoves. A file visits the backs of to saw teeth that lost their enthusiasm. A note goes in a small book, sacks left, rails greased, then set it to fingers for the night. The book closes with no drama. Sleep rehearses itself behind the eyes. Outside, the pond is again a flat sentence under falling snow. Tomorrow may offer one more day, or the season may decide it has said enough. In either case, the work is ready to pause, pots brushed, tools put by, cold banked like any other store of food. And as the pond lays its new sheet of white and the ice house settles to its long, dry breathing, we can step away from winter and toward warm air and wooden mallets. When you're ready, we'll enter a shaded yard in Polynesia, where inner bark loosens in water and Tapa learns its soft thunder under patient hands. Morning begins under leaves that trade the wind in whispers. A path of packed earth leads from the house to a small grove of paper mulberry straight stems, pale bark, and the soft, clean smell that comes when the day is new. The trees stand like well-kept brushes in a jar. Each was planted with thought to distance and light, so trunks would rise even and smooth, without low branches to complicate the work. The first task is choosing which stems are ready. A hand circles a trunk and decides by feel. Bark should give under the thumb and yet hold its line. The wood within should feel neither heavy nor hollow. A knife travels at a slant near the base, careful and plain. The stem tips gently into a waiting arm. No pile is made. Each cut stem is carried to a shaded mat right away, so sunlight will not teach the bark to cling. Bark comes away with small persuasion. A lengthwise slit, shallow as a thought, opens a narrow seam. Fingers at the seam lift, not to tear, only to begin a peel that continues with its own mind once started. Outer bark thin and eager to flake is coaxed away from the inner skin that matters. That inner layer, pale and damp, is the cloth's future. Strips are folded in loose fans and kept under leaf so air will not hurry them towards stiffness. Water waits a few steps away in a low trough lined with smooth stones. The strips slide in and darkened by a shade. They lie there not to drown, but to soften, so fibers will listen when asked to part from pith. A shell the kind that fits the palm and carries a mild curve is the scraper for this art. The blade is not sharp enough to injure, it is just honest enough to persuade. Strip after strip comes to the board. The outer face meets the shell and loses what it no longer needs. The inner face meets the shell and keeps what it intends to be. Small sounds gather, water tapping stone, shell sighing along bast, the short, fine rip of soft pith leaving, the folded murmur of a leaf set back over worked strips. The board is washed often with a handful of water so the clinging bits will go away willingly. A rag woven from old cloth, soft with long use, wipes the shell's edge between strokes. The shell feels warmer with work. The hand knows to rest it a breath in the shade, then try again. Scraped strips return to water, this time in a wider bowl where they can lie without folding. A little time there loosens their tiredness from being handled. Meanwhile, the anvil, a length of hardwood set on low blocks, is visited. Its surface is smooth but not slick, carrying the memory of 1,000 gentle impacts. The beater rests beside it, a wooden mallet with 4 faces, 1 smooth, 3 grooved in different widths. The grooves will teach the fibers to spread, the smooth face will calm what they have learned. Before any striking, the strips are thinned at their ends with thumb and shell so the joins can be quiet later. To pieces that will meet are tested edge to edge. If they disagree, they are set aside to rest. If they agree, they stay on the board and wait for their moment. This pace does not resemble a hurry. It resembles cooking that prefers time to heat. Now the beating begins, and the yard takes on the sound that gives this craft its nickname. It is not loud. It is steady, a wooden note that repeats and travels through fences, telling neighbors what work today's. The strip lies lengthwise on the anvil. The beater's grooved face lands along it, not from above like a blow, but from a small arc, carrying the wrist's kindness. Tap after tap, the fibers open sideways. The strip grows wider and thinner, still itself, only more so. A side note belongs here, spoken gently. Barkcloth is not woven as thread is, it is coaxed. Fibers that were once up and down are encouraged to be next to one another. Moisture helps. Pressure helps. And patience helps most. The beating does not bruise when done correctly. It persuades. When one face has learned enough, the strip is turned and the next groove used. The sound changes a shade. The thinner groove sings a higher note, the wider groove a lower. The beater listens, as much as the ear does. A spot that stays stiff receives a few extra invitations. Edges that think of tearing are patted with a wet fingertip and left alone until they choose better behavior. Widened pieces meet one another in pairs. Their thinned edges overlap like the meeting of 2 calm waves. The smooth face of the beater arrives then, not to force, only to seal like taps that press fibers into friendship. The join disappears by patience, not by glue. The growing sheet moves from anvil to mat, from mat to shade, from shade to anvil again, each transition as unremarkable as a breath. A sheet the size of 2 hands becomes the size of 4, then of a door panel, then wider still. Water visits often. A small bowl rides near the anvil with a clean loop of cloth inside. The cloth comes out damp, finds stubbornness, and returns. Fibers remember kindness when they are allowed to drink a little. The anvil sees a wipe with the flat of the palm between sheets, so no stray fiber from one piece rides into the next. The beaters' faces receive a rub with oil on a cloth when their lines begin to hold lint. Tools kept clean speak more softly. Noon slides by without the yard noticing much. Shade shifts and is coaxed back with a woven screen. Children pass the gate and walk quieter than usual because the sound here is like someone counting out loud, and they do not wish to break it. A dog sleeps where shade repeats. Steam drifts from a nearby pot, not because it's needed here, but because another dish is cooking and the yard shares its air. After a run of wide beating, the sheet is lifted by its edges and held to the light. It glows like a quiet sky. Thin places show themselves by brightness, thick places stay soft gray. Thin places are reminded by the smooth face and a gentle, upward lay of damp cloth. Thick places are taught by a return to a deeper groove and patient taps along the grain. Theme is evenness, not perfection. Cloth that breathes evenly will take color evenly later and hang kindly as garment or panel. A small aside on naming sits well here. Different islands call tools by names that carry their own stories. Anvils with one name here, beaters another there. Stencil boards later with names that belong to one shore and not the next. This account walks carefully among those terms, preferring the shapes rather than the labels, so the rhythm of the work stays at the center while words keep the edges tidy. By late morning, 2 sheets have become one broader field. Edges lie flat without resentment. A corner, still proud of its thickness, receives one more round from the narrowest groove, then a kindness from the smooth face. The growing cloth rests on a board under a breath of breeze while the next set of strips meets the shell again. Work rotates like this so nothing is asked to hurry for drying or to wait so long it forgets what it was learning. When the beater pauses, the yard seems larger. Leaves speak again. A bird crosses and decides the anvil is not a branch after all. The hand that holds the beater rubs its wrist and then returns to the handle, which has learned the shape of that palm over yours. Fibers wait, ready. The anvil keeps its patient temper. The next set of strips slide from water to board, and the shell travels once more, drawing away what would complicate tomorrow. The soft thunder begins again, steady and kind. The morning's narrow strips have become broad sheets, and now the work turns from pieces to planes. 2 sections are laid side by side on the anvil board, edges thinned earlier so they will meet without making a ridge. Water helps the introduction. A cloth is lifted from the bowl and drawn once along each edge, leaving a glisten that promises patience rather than haste. The smooth face of the beater rests in the hand. Its weight is familiar and mild. Taps begin at the seam center and move outward. They are not heavy. They are frequent, like a steady rain that chooses to fall in one place until the ground agrees to drink. Fibers interlock by nearness, not by force. A fingertip trails the join and finds no step, only a change in direction that can be felt but not seen. The sheet is turned. The scene is asked the same questions from the other side. It answers with the same quiet, and the beater thanks it with two softer taps to seal the courtesy. Joins follow joins until the cloth measures longer than a sleeping mat and then wider than the shade it rests under. Along the perimeter, thinness and strength must shake hands. Corners are eased with a narrow grooved face, never overworked. Edges are pressed with the smooth face in small, overlapping circles so the boundary will resist fray without looking bossed. Where two seams intersect, the order of tapping matters. Lines cross like threads do, though nothing here is woven. The hands remember which seam was first, so the second can lie politely. A board with a fine pattern appears from under cloth. Its surface holds shallow, repeating ridges, nothing sharp, only regular. The sheet is laid across it, still moist. A light sweep of the smooth beater encourages the cloth to listen to the board. Not for decoration yet, only to even the surface and teach the fibers to lie in one direction, then another. The result is subtle, a quiet sheen that catches light like a calm lagoon, not like polished shell. When the cloth is lifted, the board's voice stays behind as evenness rather than figure. Color, if it is to arrive, must come with the same modesty. Dyes are made nearby in little bowls, a brown that remembers bark, a warm red persuaded from roots, a yellow like late afternoon, and a black that prefers patience. Each bath is strained with woven leaf so only the softest liquid remains. A tester scrap drinks a corner of each and dries in quick beauty on a reed tray. There is no rush to lay color upon the big sheet. Wet on to wet becomes a bloom that wanders, too dry resents the gift. The cloth is brought to the doorway, where a little moving air will draw surface damp away and leave the fibers kind. First, a ground, a diluted wash of pale bark brown stroked on with a wide brush that barely touches the cloth. The aim is not to paint, only to temper the glare of newness. The wash travels up and down the width in unbroken sways. Then the sheet is turned and brushed once more crosswise so no band will announce itself later. The color settles as a whisper you'd only hear if you stood this close. Now, edges. A border never shocks here. A thin band of deeper tone runs along the long sides, painted with a flat brush whose hairs have learned to hold their line. The hand rests on a support stick laid across the sheet so no sleeve will kiss the wet. At the corners, the band breathes a little wider, then narrows again, that enjoys that slight swelling as a sign of care rather than a flourish. If figures are wanted, they will be suggested, not demanded. A leaf laid under the cloth turns into a hint above it when the beater's smooth face passes lightly. Elsewhere, a carved stencil kept between boards when not in use rests upon the cloth for a breath while a thin pad touches color through its openings. The stencil lifts from one edge and leaves shapes that belong to plants and tides more than to rulers and straight edges. The sheet goes back to shape. Drying is not a process so much as a permission to wait. Between color and drying, there is the art of quiet felting. A second layer may be married to the first where strength wants company center panels for garments, or places that will know many hands. Strips, thinned at their margins, are laid atop and brushed with water where they overlap the ground. Taps from the smooth face follow a little firmer than seam work, but not eager. The two layers come to trust each other. When lifted to the light, they read as one. Work rotates to keep everything friendly. While the colored sheet listens to shade, new strips enter the water trough, shells return to scraping, the anvil accepts a smaller sheet for practice, and a quiet check of tools keeps the afternoon ready. The beater's grooves are inspected with a sliver of reed if any lint clings. A pass with oiled cloth smooths it away. The anvil's surface receives a breath of water spread by the palm so the next sheet will not stick. Bowls are covered with leaves to keep flying dust from tasting the dye. A word on company. This craft rarely proceeds in solitude. One pair of hands beats while another strains dye, a third lifts sheets to light, and the fourth readies cords for hanging. Talk is low or not at all, broken by remarks that are more calibration than conversation. This edge wants patience. The brown needs water. Turn the board. Children are welcome in the shade's edge where their feet will not trip cords. They learn by watching ears as much as by watching hands. When the first sheet is ready to hang, cords are drawn under its top edge at the spans. A helper lifts one side, another takes the other side. Both move together to a line strung between posts. Cloth clips, little clamps of wood with soft jaws hold the sheet without pinching. The weight settles evenly. The border dries true, not pulling, not waving. Wind is a collaborator here only when it can be persuaded to stay kind. If it grows busy, a second line is run closer to the ground so the sheet can rest without flapping. Sun is permitted but moderated. A bask is enough to set color, and temper damp. Full glare would teach brittleness. A woven screen stands at a slant to filter the day, and the cloth thanks it by drying in even temper. From time to time the edge is stroked with a wet finger to keep it from learning a curl. When it behaves, the hand moves on. While color settles, pieces destined for uncolored use wrappings, linings. Simple screens receive attention of their own. Their finish is a burnish rather than a dye. A smooth shell or a flat stone travels over the surface with a little oil from a nut rubbed into the tool's face. The movement is small and repetitive. The cloth develops a calm gloss that will shed dust and greet hands with a friendly slide. Afternoon tilts, and the sound of beating becomes more spacious. Longer pauses between runs as sheets move to lines and new strips take their places. A pot lid lifts at the cooking fire and returns. The yard smells now of wet fiber, thin dye, and the sweet wood of the anvil. A dog rolls and wakes, then decides against inspection. The beater rises for one more seam, and the small thunder resumes in soft cadence. As light thins, the hanging sheet is visited again. Corners are checked, border holds true, the ground wash lies even. A finger taps the cloth, and hears a low note, proof that damp has gone from loud to quiet. The sheet is lifted down by its cords, folded over a wide pole so no crease will form, and carried inside to sleep flat on a mat beneath another board. Overnight, its temper will even. Tomorrow it may meet pattern with more confidence, or become garment panels that will learn their wearer's shape. A last round gathers tools. Shells bathe and dry. Bowls take covers. The beater's faces receive a final wipe. The anvil is brushed with a palm and a smile for its day's patience. The trough is skinned of floating fiber so morning won't start with yesterday's work. Cords are coiled loosely so they will not memorize a kink. Evening comes as a soft band under the eaves. Voices in neighboring yards grow with it, then thin. The mallet lies down. Cloth rests in flat peace. Hands wash in cool water that carries a faint tint of bark, and red away into the soil where tomorrow's trees drink. Morning returns with a pale light that does not hurry anyone. The yard wakes to tools already arranged in a way that feels like memory anvil steady. Beaters clean, bowls of color asleep under leaves. Today belongs to pattern and finish. The broadsheets, rested overnight under boards, have learned to lie calm. When lifted, they neither stick nor sulk. Fingers run the edges, the cloth answers with an even, low rustle. A board is brought out from a dry corner hardwood, smooth and carved in shallow relief. Its surface holds repeating ridges and gentle motifs, arcs like waves, chevrons that suggest fish bones, tiny notches that read as seed. Nothing cuts deep. The board is a tutor, not a ruler. A helper wipes it with a soft cloth to raise no dust, then lays it on blocks so air can travel beneath. The large sheet is placed over it like a skin over a drum. Water greets the surface with a light brush and long strokes, only enough to make it willing. The beater's smooth face returns to work with a new purpose. It glides across the cloth and passes from edge to edge, never striking hard, always landing and lifting like a tide. The pattern beneath rises into the fibers as a texture more than a picture. Hands read at first, then eyes. The cloth develops a faint, even sheen that catches daylight and lets it go again softly. Where a curve must show kinder, the beater visits twice and then rests. The board teaches, the beater repeats. Resist paste appears for edges that wish to carry discreet brightness when dye returns. The paste is simple and local starch from cooked root beaten smooth with water, a whisper of ash to temper it, sometimes a breath of sap to help it stay where set. It lies in a shallow bowl like cloud. A narrow brush with trimmed hairs draws the paste where it should go, thin bands along borders, small crescents around a corner, dots that will later resemble seeds fallen in an even scatter. The paste dries to a tender film. When color meets it later, dye will look and pass by. Elsewhere on a second sheet, a different quiet trick waits, sun that paints without pigment. Leaves with clear veins, fern, breadfruit, hibiscus are chosen for their skeletons more than their shapes. They are laid across damp cloth in a patient pattern, some alone, some in pairs angled like speaking hands. A slat stand lifts the sheet so air can wander beneath. A woven screen tilts to keep harsh glare away while still inviting light. The sun does not scorch. It whispers. As the cloth dries, outlines settle and by modest contrast, leaf forms arriving as memory rather than command. While light works, dyes wake again. Bowls are strained, and a gentle thinness is chosen for the day. Dark wants patience, but repeatable work prefers a softened bath. A tester scrap takes a sip, dries by the doorway, and chews the right hush. The sheet that received resist lines is laid over a reed mat, and color touches it with a wide brush that refuses to drip. Strokes run with the grain, then across, never back and forth, until where he shows the brush glides and pauses, like someone thinking. Where paste sits, pigment skims and leaves. Where cloth is bare, color stays. Borders emerge as if a margin had always been there. The dots become a quiet constellation. Bands learn to travel evenly along edges without meeting in a hard corner. At intervals, the cloth is lifted at one side so dye can move and not settle into a hard line. A helper walks the opposite edge to keep weight even. The yard smells mild wet bark, Thin dye, the clean wood of the board under the first sheet. Patterns made by some get their turn next. Leaves lift away one by one. The cloth beneath has learned their silhouette not with a hard edge but a softened halo. No paste is scraped, nothing peels. The work looks as if the yard itself had exhaled shapes onto it. A fingertip travels along a fern's ghost and feels nothing to catch a surface unchanged, only light changed. The sheet hangs on a line for a last breath of shade. The wind ignores it. Patterns like this are lighter than air. Some pieces prefer no figure at all, only finish. Those become clothing that hangs well, wraps without bulk, and forgives folding. They need a different tool now, a burnisher carved from smooth shell, nut or stone rubbed with a drop of oil. The burnisher travels in loops that grow larger, then smaller, as if drawing circles across the cloth and closing them with a sigh. The surface develops a friendly glide. Dust will not cling. Skin will approve. Edges ask for manners. A narrow strip, beaten thin, is laid along the outermost rim. It is dressed with damp and invited to join by taps from the smooth face. Corners get a diagonal slice of strip that lies across the meeting like a small bridge. This prevents the point from learning to curl. Where two layers make a garment panel, felting taps repeat in a small square at the place a tie will pass often. The cloth learns to be strong not by stiffening, but by preparing. A modest aside belongs here, naming changes with distance. On one island a pattern board has a word that belongs only there, on another, the beaters' faces have family names. Some shores rub color through a stencil, some coax it by rubbing over a leaf, some save dye for borders alone. Nothing in this yard corrects another yard. Tools vary, the logic stays. Make fibers agree, ask color to be quiet company, let finish suit the cloth's intended life. When garments are intended wraps for hips, longer cloth for ceremony, panels for room dividers, the yard's rhythm widens to include measuring bodies and spaces without numbers. A length runs from elbow to wrist and back again. A weight is guessed by two open hands with a breath extra so ties can find their work. Cords are cut from plant fiber twisted between palms until they sing, then left to rest so twist will sleep. Knots are practiced that open into tugs and never fail in one. If the cloth will speak at a gathering, a boarder is allowed a gentler voice, perhaps a deep band at the bottom that reads like earth, perhaps a top line thin as horizon. Brightness is used like spice, a line of warm red where eyes will travel, a single black thread of paint dividing to gentler tones so both look truer. A small seal brushed in one corner says which family's hands did this work. It is not signature as possession, it is accountability as courtesy. The first finished pieces dry under watch. The day has grown taller, lights stepping across the yard without leaning. Helpers shift the woven screens, keeping cloth in bright shade. A fingertip check press. Lift tells whether damp remains in the center. When the answer is almost, the cloth is brought inside and laid flat under a board with smooth stones along two edges. And there teaches it to relax. When lifted, it stays the shape it learned, folds without creasing, and opens without complaint. Before evening, cloth for household use meets one last kindness. Scent? Leaves of citrus or a branch of fragrant shrub are stroked across the surface, not to perfume loudly, only to leave a breath of green that will fade inside a day. Smoke is avoided now, finish wants clean air. Rolled loosely around a wide stick, The pieces rest until called for. Some will go to neighbors for wrapping gifts or cradling new pots. Some will be stored under the sleeping platform, wrapped against damp, marked with a strip of dyed fiber that says bordered or plain without words. Tools are reviewed as if they were friends leaving the yard at dusk. The pattern board is brushed and slid into its place between planks so its raised lines won't flatten. The beater shows no lint in its grooves, its handle gets a touch of oil. Bowls are rinsed and turned upside down to forget their colors until tomorrow. Clips come off lines and sit jaw to jaw so their springs rest. The trough gets a last skin. The anvil receives a wipe and a hand laid flat on its surface in thanks. A dog thumps its tail twice and decides all is well. Evening air cools the yard in a way that lets everyone hear their own breath. The finished cloth lies with a quiet confidence near the doorway. The unfinished strips rest in water under leaves. Hands carry a softness from the work that remains even when the mallet sleeps. The soft thunder. Pauses, not ended, only held. Patterns waiting in boards, and bowls now step toward daily life. The stencil bundle comes out from its resting planks, thin sheets carefully cut with figures that feel familiar to the eye, curved fronds, little fish bones, starbursts like blossoms. Each stencil's edges are checked with a fingertip so no burr will scratch a wet surface. They are not tools for loud marks, they are guides for whispers. A sheet, burnished yesterday, lies flat on the anvil board. Resist pastes off and even meets a narrow pad. The pad dabs through the stencil with a breath, not a push, placing small islands that dye will later ignore. The stencil lifts from one corner first, always the same corner, so the cloth will not stretch. A next figure repeats along the border at easy intervals, spaced by the arm more than by measure. Patterns here keep time with breath and footsteps, not with rulers. Another cloth asks for a different voice, a gentle black drawn in thin lines. A reed pen trimmed to a soft wedge carries the ink. It travels along the border with an unbroken, slow curve that returns to itself without hurry. Corners receive a patient turn wider than the line, a little rest for the eye. Where a small mistake thinks of happening, the hand pauses and lets it become a feature to dots, then three so the rhythm lives. These are quiet freedoms, the right to repeat without counting, to vary without warning. Finished pieces move from making to meaning when they leave the line. A neighbor arrives with a basket and a small request cloth to wrap a gift for a new child. From a stack of plain, soft sheets, a square is chosen by weight and kindness. It is folded once across the basket so the edges meet in a calm line. A narrow cord twists between palms, left over right, right over left until it sings, then rests. The cord ties in a flat knot that opens with two tugs. The knot sits off-center by intent. Symmetry here would pretend to be a package, not a welcome. The basket rides away with cloth that will be unknotted, smooth kept, and used again. Cloth for clothing learns its wear the way a path learns the feet that use it. A wrap is measured by arms, not numbers. One outstretched length, then another, then a hand's breadth more for breath. Ties fasten lightly. A newly beaten panel feels almost shy when first worn stiffer along the border, careful it folds. After a day of walking and sitting, it relaxes. After a wash in sweet water and a night dried under shade, it becomes itself pliant, strong, faintly fragrant from the leaves stroked over it. Edges begin to memorize their turns. The cloth behaves like good manners, moving before it's asked, never getting in the way. Household pieces take their places as if they had always been there. A plain sheet hangs in a doorway to sift the air, softening the line between rooms without closing it. Another becomes a mat under a bowl that likes to wander. A third wraps dried leaves or cooked roots, keeping them content on their way from hearth to neighbor. Each use teaches the cloth a new kindness, how to lie at a threshold and not curl, how to fold at the same crease without hardening, how to meet steam and then let it go without complaint. Care is unremarkable and steady. Washing happens in cool water with a handful of grated root to lift soil. No twisting that could teach a crease to dominate, only pressing, lifting, and a smooth drag along the board with the flat of the palm. Sun visits, but not too long. Shade finishes. Borders are stroked with wet fingers so they will remember their line. For scent, a few leaves rub across the surface, then fade. Smoke is left to fish and fires today. The cloth prefers clean air. Repair belongs to the rhythm as surely as beating does. A torn place is not scolded, it is invited back into strength. A patch, beaten thin at its edges, is laid under the wand inside the garment. Water meets both layers, and the smooth face of the beater arrives with patient taps until fibers agree to hold one another. If the damage is a long line, its edges are teased together with the shell before the patch goes on, so the join will read as a quiet seam rather than a hard scar. When the cloth dries, the repair is there, but it does not ask to be noticed. Some pieces move towards ceremony, the ones that will stand behind a storyteller, carry a dancer's steps, or hang near a place of greeting. These receive color with a little more depth, still gentle, but willing to hold eye for a breath longer. A border in warm red might sit low, steady like earth. A cloud of pale yellow might rest high, like the sky just before the sun considers itself. Patterns repeat farther apart, giving space to emptiness, which here is not lack but field. A tiny seal enters in one corner, brushed with a pad, the family mark or the maker's mark, not possession but responsibility. Cloth remembers hands. Gifting has a shape that everyone knows and no one thinks to name. When a visitor comes, a folded sheet appears as naturally as water. It opens over knees, making a lap landscape where bowls can sit and hands can rest. When a child is carried, a narrow strip wraps waist and shoulder, spreading weight and keeping both calm. When elders meet, a panel rides over the shoulder like shade and stays there not as rank but as comfort. The cloth speaks without words. You are seen, the day is ordinary and good. We have time. Tools, too, become part of daily sight. The beater leans where it always leans. The anvil's surface shows the faint polish of use, not shine, only readiness. The stencil bundle slides back between planks. Bowls dry upside down, with a fingertip chalk mark on each to say which color lived there today. A small brush lies across a leaf so its hairs won't take a bend. The trough rests with a film of clean water to keep the stones from feeling abandoned. Nothing here is put away with drama. Everything rests where tomorrow can find it without asking. When cloth grows old, as all honest things do, it does not leave the yard. A sheet thinned by years becomes strips that edge you pieces, a soft border with memory in it. Another becomes a liner for a basket that carries fruit. The worn center comforts what rides there. Small squares are cut from the best of what remains to polish shells and stones, To wipe the beater faces clean, to teach little hands about soft and strong. Even threads, teased from an exhausted strip, twist into ties for hanging new work. Use continues in smaller circles until nothing useful is left. Evening brings the practice of thanks. Finished pieces are stacked flat and weighted at one edge so they will sleep well. Worn cloth returns to the mat for repair or to the cutting board for a second life. Tools, seawater, and cloth, and a wipe with oil only where wood meets hand. The yard empties without announcement. The soft thunder stops mid-sentence, not rudely, only because its speaker has paused to breathe. In the house, a garment panel lies across a stool, edges remembering what the day taught. By the door, a folded sheet waits for tomorrow's errand. On the line, a last piece sways and then settles as the evening air cools. The smell of cooked roots invites quiet. A shell on the anvil's edge catches one more thin line of light and lets it go. Morning carries a small expectancy like a hand resting open. Finished cloth sleeps flat beneath boards. Edges lie well, colors have settled into their calm. Today the work turns outward to journeys, to gatherings, to the little book of memory that lives in the mind more than on a page. Bundles are wrapped for travel with the same patience used to make them. Sheets roll on a smooth stick, never folded sharp. A tie of twisted fiber sits near one end, not the middle, so the roll can be lifted without strain. Each bundle receives a soft tag, a narrow strip dyed brown for plain, red for bordered, yellow for patterned by sun. No letters are needed. Anyone who touches the tags can tell their meaning by habit. At a neighboring house, a family readies a small exchange. A tray of cooked roots will go one way, a garment panel the other. When the visitor arrives, cloth takes its place between hands before bowls appear. It spreads across knees, making a steady lap for gifts. The panel for giving is lifted with both palms and offered with a slight dip that is neither bow nor command, more a promise to care. The receiving cloth answers by opening, then closing again around what it has been trusted to hold. The sound is not words, it is the hush and rustle of bass that has learned friendship. Ceremony, when it comes, is modestly arranged. A shade is stretched where people will gather. Panels chosen earlier are tied to a low line so they form a soft wall behind the place where speaking will happen. Borders sit low and patient. Light patterns made by sun are higher, where air can lift them without fuss. A longer cloth lies on the ground like a stream for feet to learn its cool. Children learn where not to step by watching adults, not by scolding. Before the speaking begins, hands touch edges. One panel is drawn a finger's width tighter along its top tie, another is smooth at a corner that remembered yesterday's roll. A small shell burnisher glides across a dull patch and leaves a faint sheen, then rests. If a tiny tear shows where a tie has worked too honestly, a prepared patch beaten thin at the edges slips underneath, water greets it, and the beater's smooth face taps quietly until the cloth forgets it was ever to pieces. Repair is not hidden here, it is folded into the day as proof that care continues. When sound rises, story chant. Names remembered, cloth stands behind it like a steady breath. The black line laid yesterday along a border keeps the eye from wandering. A soft yellow ground reads like late afternoon and lifts faces kindly. A thin red thread returns in the corner near the speaker's hand. It does not shout, yet people find themselves looking back to it, the way a shore organizes a bay. A small seal in a low corner says who made the piece, which family carries its responsibility. The mark is a courtesy, not a claim. After the gathering, panels come down with unhurried hands. Cords are loosened, not yanked. Cloth lies across a wide pole for a moment to breathe out the day's warmth. A leaf crushed between fingers brushes the surface once to leave a green that will fade by morning. Back in the yard, pieces sleep under boards again, never stacked carelessly, never left hanging where night damp might teach them to soak. Some cloth travels farther. A canoe receives rolls bound in pairs, padded by fresh leaves so edges won't memorize pressure. The bundles stow along the hull under a woven cover. Water's small salt is not a friend to vast distance, is managed by shade, careful ties, and pauses where river meets sea. When the cloth arrives in another village, it carries not only pattern and color, but also the touch of the yard that made it, the even beater strokes, the quiet border choices, the calm felt in the seams. At home, everyday use continues. A doorway screen is unhooked and stroked with wet fingers where an edge decided to learn a curl. It returns to its straight lesson without complaint. A wrapping cloth is rinsed in cool water, pressed under a smooth board, and hung under shade. A garment panel absorbs a day's movement, then rests on a stool with its edges aligned under a round stone. Small squares cut from elder cloth polish tools, white dye bowls, and travel in pockets as handkerchiefs. Nothing leaves the circle quickly. A gentle note on time belongs here. Barkcloth does not pretend to be forever. It asks for touch and returns favor when tended. When its day passes, it becomes smaller usefulness, style, lining, polish, teaching scrap until even that is finished. Then it returns to the soil that fed the tree whose bark first met the shell. The yard lets it go without sentimentality. New trees are already standing with their pale skins, learning wind. Late afternoon brings the ledger hour. There is no bound book on the table, only a short stick, a flat tray of sand and memory. Lines are drawn for pieces made, one long for a broad sheet, a short for a small, a dot for repair done, a curve for cloth given. The tray is smoothed after the count remains in the hands that wrote it, and in how many boards now lean with work behind them. For cloth sent away, a strip of dyed fiber hangs from a peg, brown, red, or yellow, until news returns of, well received, needs to more by the harvest moon. Pegs empty, new strips appear. It is a ledger anyone in the family can read by looking at the wall. The day closes the yard with the same order it opened. Pattern boards return between their planks, beaters lie with faces up so grooves won't remember weight, bowls dry, upside down, quiet as stones. Cords coil in loose spirals. The trough is skimmed and left with a clean shine of water. A last piece hangs where night air will carry it toward evenness. The house door leans on its latch. A cooking pot settles. The dog shifts twice and surrenders to sleep. As the dark gathers, the yard keeps one more habit. A hand lays flat on the anvil, warm from the day's palms, though the wood is cool now. It is not a prayer exactly, only thanks delivered in the language of touch, for trees that grew straight, for water that kept patience, for tools that remembered their jobs, and for cloth that will be quiet company in ruins on shoulders, between neighbors. The soft thunder has ended for the night, but its echo, slow, kind, regular, remains, the way a heartbeat continues after laughter has faded. Now these gentle stories can sit beside you as you rest. Thank you for listening, and may your night be untroubled and soft, sweet dreams.